To today's session on DevOps and introduction to DevOps. So today we'll be talking more all about what exactly is DevOps and how can you get started with DevOps and why DevOps is so important in the entire software development industry and in general, and how it's becoming one of the fastest growing job roles today. And especially even if you're a fresher or if even if you're studying in college right now, you can get internships and job opportunities as a fresher in the entire sector of DevOps. And we'll also be announcing a DevOps course that, or basically a number of DevOps videos and tutorials that we'll be releasing on this YouTube channel for this Discord community, for the Scalar Discord community. So stay tuned, and we'll also be taking up some questions towards the end. We'll also be sharing what are some of the resources, how can you get started, what's the roadmap for getting into DevOps, and finally we'll also share some resources that will be beneficial in case you are interested to basically get into DevOps. Now, of course, before we speak about anything related to DevOps and how to get started with it, for those folks who might be interested in what exactly is DevOps, so I'll start by presenting my screen. So give me 1 second. Let me start sharing my screen. All right. My screen should be visible now. So, of course, today we are going to be covering like what exactly is DevOps and why was there a need for DevOps to come, right? So, before we define DevOps, let's just take a few moments and a few minutes to just understand that how did our software development process actually work before, DevOps actually became a concept and became widespread to be used as the de facto standard as part of the software development lifecycle. So we'll just talk a bit about that, and then we'll cover the life cycle and the entire roadmap and how basically you can get started with DevOps. So if we just talk about primarily like what is the historical, like how software development used to be done before DevOps actually came. So you may or may not have come across the terminology of the waterfall model. So the waterfall model was a simple model that we used in the software development life cycle, which we also call as the SDLC, where we used to first gather the requirements for our software. Then we used to create a design. We used to start the development of the model of that particular of that particular software, and then we used to test it, we used to deploy it, and we used to maintain it. So basically, it was a it was a very linear system that once you have basically done the development and you have moved on to testing and you have moved on to actually deploying your software so that it can be used by the public, it was very difficult to actually make any changes to any of these particular phases of this waterfall model. So let's say that during the testing or during the deployment, you realize that you probably have missed out a very important feature during the development process. So it was not a very straightforward thing to be able to just move back to the development process and then come back to the deployment. So it was a very linear process that you started with the requirements and finally went into the maintenance. So that was one of the biggest issues that was there. That once, let's say that the development team was basically using an environment, then let's say once your development team has done their development and it goes to the testing and to the deployment teams, they were primarily just working inside of the same environment, right? So if let's say during the time of the deployment and testing, if there was any bug that might have come up, right, if there was any bug that might have been detected, then the development team of course will go ahead and will have to first fix it. And that operation side of things, where we are finding out bugs and reporting them back to the development team and resolution of the bugs and all, that is not a very streamlined process, as you might probably imagine. So in case you have already studied about the waterfall model, then you might be aware of such a thing. And also, if we just take a look at how these applications were basically run and deployed. So historically, we used to basically run a single application on a single machine, which is also called as like a server, and there is no ability to be able to actually run multiple applications on a single machine. So let's say if you were to like run multiple applications on multiple machines, you'll require more amount of resources that would lead to more amount of time that would be involved in actually running these resources. The cost involved in having to basically set up and maintain more number of computers to just be able to run. So let's say if you were to scale up your application, initially if it's serving to 100 people and now it was to be served to 1,000 people, then that would like increase the time, the effort, and also the money, the cost of maintaining so many number of machines. And that basically led to the introduction of virtual machines, which basically are able to help run your applications in a remote server, so you don't need to have dedicated on premise storage or on premise computers to be able to run your applications. Those could be done with the help of a machine that was kept somewhere else, and you can basically be able to interact with it with the help of cloud computing. So with DevOps, you'll also hear cloud computing also quite a lot. So we'll be covering all of that today. So that's a bit of the historical idea of how basically we started with this waterfall model, and then after waterfall model we also had another very famous process or methodology in software development, known as the agile methodology, where we are basically repeating the continuous repetition of the development of during the software development life cycle, and then also testing. So basically this as compared to the waterfall model, the sprints, since like agile methodologies are all about sprints, so the development testing is very quick, and you have dedicated sessions where you are having both your development and testing. So basically both your development and testing are concurrent, and that basically leads us to what exactly is DevOps. So after seeing all of these all of these issues that we saw with the waterfall model, with the agile model, that led to the introduction of DevOps. So what exactly is DevOps primarily? So the biggest issue when it came the biggest issue when it came to understand what is the because there was definitely a lack of understanding between, or lack of collaboration between, the developers who were working on the software development itself, like they were developing the software. And then there were these operation engineers who were primarily focused, or whose focus was to basically go ahead and release the software. So software developers were primarily focused on how shall we create a software, and the operation engineers were that okay, this software has been created, now how shall we distribute the software and how to maintain the software. So there was a lack of collaboration between the developers and the operation engineers, which basically slowed down the development process and the release process. So in order to increase the collaboration between the developers and the operational engineers, that basically led to the birth of DevOps approach. So DevOps is primarily aimed to help the collaboration between the development and the operation side of the entire software development lifecycle. So that is why it's basically made up of two different words, which is development and operations, right? So it's basically a set of practices and a number of different tools, both open source tools and proprietary tools, that help organizations to build their products faster, because of the better communication and better integration between the development and the operations functions. And when we basically talk about operations, let's basically break it down into what exactly does that mean, right? So basically this is the entire DevOps life cycle, right? So of course with development, we are following the same pattern, which is whenever we discuss about developing a software, we are talking about the requirement gathering, like what should be the requirements. So that basically comes under the planning of your software. Then basically you start to actually create your software. That's the actual software development process. This will also involve the the design aspects, so design plus development. And then basically what we'll so this is part of the development life cycle, right? From the development part. Now, when it comes to the operations, right? So once you have basically gone ahead and developed some software, you need to test it, you need to release it, right? And you might have to basically configure that particular software based on what particular end user or what is the end environment in which you're basically releasing it, because you might have to configure your application separately for a Linux environment, for a Windows environment, for a Mac environment. And then once you have basically released your software, you also need to maintain it, and for that you will basically monitor your software to ensure that your software is performing well, and there are no lag, there is no issue coming up when there is increased traffic on your system. And you also have to be able to maintain how is your software able to maintain, or how is it able to actually keep a track of the incoming traffic that is coming to the software. And of course, then in the actual development life cycle, once you have created your software, then you have to basically package and make it ready to get deployed and make it ready to be released, right? And then verify that whether yes, your software is actually working correctly or not. So as you can see that both the development and the operations, they go very hand in hand together, right? It's not just that development is a separate process and the operation side is a separate process. So from a development, we are more focused towards requirement gathering, designing and developing our software and testing our software. And in the operation side, we are managing our we are basically packaging our software, releasing it, deploying it, and ensuring that the software that we release, it is performing smoothly. And if there are any incoming issues that might be released, might be announced, we're able to monitor the performance of our softwares and ensure that they are working they're working correctly. So that is why the the intersection of the DevOps, it's very the development and the operations is very tightly bound. And the aim of the DevOps is to basically shorten the software development life cycle by delivering the features, fixes, and updates, which are very closely knit together with the software development approach. So basically, this consists of two main aspects, and which are the and you'll basically also hear the terms, different terms, and we'll basically come to the DevOps roadmap a bit later. But before that, we'll just take a bit amount of time to also cover what is continuous integration and continuous deployment, because whenever we talk about the DevOps lifecycle, there are basically a number of things that are happening over here, right? So the first thing that we'll basically talk about is the continuous deployment or the continuous development, right? Now, within the continuous development, we have primarily two different things, which is the continuous testing, and we have continuous integration. So when we talk about the continuous testing, testing is a very important aspect of any software that we develop, right? So whether it comes to creating some software that is a personal software, or of course a software that might be being released by MNC. So testing is very important, because we need to test whether the software that we are developing whether it has any bugs. And a lot of times what might happen is that if we are making some new changes in our product, we need to ensure that other aspects or the other parts of our software have not been affected. So basically, there are a number of different automation testing tools. There are a number of different tools that allow you to basically automate this entire process of testing your application. So this is what you call as the continuous testing. And with the continuous testing, we also have the continuous integration. Now, basically, the continuous integration is that it's, and again, within the entire DevOps lifecycle, the continuous integration is an extremely important stage within the entire DevOps lifecycle. And in this stage, basically, the developers are required to. So once they have, let's say, made some changes in their code base, they also, of course, need to push those changes, right? So that those changes can also be accessible by others in the working environment. So it's a in this particular stage, the developers are required to commit their changes to the source code, right? And basically the idea is that once we basically push this code, we need to go ahead and do code review, we need to test our code, we need to basically build our code, right? We need to package it together, right? So basically you write some software code. Of course, you cannot just go ahead and make this particular code file. Let's say I've written a Python file today, and you say that I will make this into an application. So you have to basically package your application. You have to build your application. That's like the process through which actual softwares are then utilized by the end users. They are not going to be using a Python script that you have written and directly use it, right? They have to basically use the packaged code, and that's what the end application is. What is being used by the people, right, who end up using your application. So this continuous integration part of making sure that your code is pushed and then doing the code review, testing, and building your project so that it can be used is very important. And the other aspect of the other aspect of our DevOps lifecycle is basically the continuous deployment. This is where our code, once it has been packaged, right, you have written your code, it has been tested, it has been built, it has been packaged. Now is the time that it will get deployed, and it will get deployed to a server which will be somewhere remote. And then of course, you'll be configuring it so that now people can actually start using. They can download your software, or if it's a website, web application, it's an app, Android app, iOS app, cross platform app, so people can actually start using it, right? So that's where that's the stage, right? The continuous deployment is the stage where the code is being deployed to your production servers, and you're doing some configuration management in order to ensure that it gets properly deployed. And or there are different tools that can be used alongside it, right? So that's where basically we talk about the continuous deployment. And this is how basically it kind of looks like. So we usually talk about the continuous integration and continuous deployment as two different parts of the entire DevOps lifecycle. So continuous integration is basically once you push your code, you build it, you test it, and you package it together. And then when it comes to deployment, and especially let's say if you're working in a large company, you don't just simply go ahead and push your code into production. You might have a development environment, you might have a staging environment, and you might have a production environment. So once a software developer, they write some code, your code first is run inside of a development environment. This development environment is just part of the internal development team. It is not made accessible to the end users. Now once you have tested your code and it works fine, you're content, you're satisfied that your code is working perfectly in your inside of your development environment, then you'll move it to staging, where it will go another set of round of testing. And once it's fine, then it'll go into production. And when it goes into production, that's when your software is actually out to be used by any regular users, right? So that's the entire aspect of the CI/CD. And this is how basically it kind of looks like as well. So you see that at the source, when a software is software developer is writing some code, they're pushing their code, it gets compiled, then we test it, then we go ahead and deploy it. So basically that's the the life cycle of the DevOps. And then of course, if we talk about the DevOps roadmap, so of course, I mean, it's there are a lot of different things that you have to learn when it comes to DevOps, right? There are a number of different prerequisites that you need to know that will help you actually become a good DevOps software, right? A good DevOps engineer. And today, as I mentioned, that there are so many opportunities in this entire software development world, that there are dedicated roles that require you to have DevOps. There are DevOps engineer roles, DevOps intern roles. And even if you are not a DevOps engineer per se, there are certain aspects of DevOps that you'll still be using in your software development journey also. If you're just a software developer, there are things such as deployment, testing, software deployment, that are now required. So if you, let's say, aspire to become a full stack engineer or a backend engineer, you'll still require to know some tools such as Docker, Kubernetes, which certain companies which not might not have a dedicated DevOps engineer might be required to be done by the backend engineers. So DevOps in itself is very important, especially if you're getting into or venturing into the software development, into the software development world. And this is the roadmap of and I'll start sharing my screen for the roadmap. So this is the website that I'll share with everyone, and we'll also share it in the chat with everyone. So this basically is the roadmap for DevOps, in case you want to get into DevOps. Now primarily, before we jump into the core concepts of DevOps, there are some things that you do require to know, right? So starting with the programming language, it could be any programming language, Python, Golang, R, Rust, or whatever you want to learn, right? But there are certain core computer science concepts that are also required, right? And these include computer networking, computer operating systems, right? And then basically your standard Linux operating system, like how basically Linux basically works, right? So these are important because within the DevOps, right, there are so many different types of things that are happening, right? So for example, you need to know about networking, know about standard operating system concepts, and learn about standard like Linux systems, because Linux systems are also very important, right? So you need to know about all of those. Now once you have basically learned all of those, right, you start to basically learn about what are virtual machines, then what are containers. You learn about container technologies like Docker, and then you learn about container orchestration technologies like Kubernetes. And then you can venture into other different type of tools. You can venture more deeply into CI/CD, right, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment. You can venture into infrastructure as code, which basically helps to provision servers, provision software. You can move more dedicatedly into the computer networking aspect of things with service meshes, right? So as you see, there are a number of different things that basically are done apart from the CI/CD. So if we just basically break it down into the major components within the DevOps, right? You have, of course, I mean, something that you'll require knowledge across any domain that you venture into DevOps. So your standard computer operating systems, computer networks, then basics of your Linux operating system, Linux commands. These are universal. That if you want to be a good DevOps engineer, these are some things that you'll definitely need, right? You'll definitely need a good understanding of how these work. Now, you within DevOps, you can venture into CI/CD, right? You can either venture into the container technologies like Docker, Kubernetes, and then if you want to move into monitoring, because monitoring is that once your software has been released into production, you need to ensure that it works correctly, right? It works well. So you have software monitoring coming into the picture. So you can venture into monitoring. You can venture into service mesh that helps us to basically work with softwares which have multiple services, and we need to communicate between them in a well to understand manner. So that also requires you to have good understanding of computer networking. But basically the main idea is that why are we covering all of this today is that we recently announced a JavaScript course, right? So on our Scalar community YouTube channel, we recently announced a YouTube series, or basically an entire course on JavaScript. So similarly, today we are announcing a course on DevOps. So in this entire DevOps course, we'll be releasing a number of videos on this YouTube channel, where we'll be starting from DevOps from scratch. So starting with what is DevOps, that we have already covered today. So what is DevOps? What is CI/CD? We'll be taking some examples of how you can set up CI/CD with GitHub Actions, and we'll be taking up some projects how to set it up for a Node project, Django project. Then we'll move to containers, Docker, Kubernetes, right? We'll venture into dedicated cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP. That's a Google Cloud platform. And of course, so these will be some deep dive sessions that will be released on YouTube. But of course, we'll have dedicated presence on our Scalar Discord as well. So in case you are having any questions related to DevOps, you can ask your questions there. And of course, we'll be conducting regular sessions on DevOps. And so in case all of you are interested to understand what is DevOps, you will be able to do that. So we are going to be releasing the videos will be coming up very shortly, probably starting from next week. We'll be releasing new videos every week regarding DevOps. And in case there are certain topics that all of you might want to be covered in the entire DevOps lifecycle, then we can basically also cover that. So that's basically the announcement regarding the DevOps. So in case you are interested to at least look at DevOps, if you are already very motivated to contribute to DevOps, and be able to start with DevOps, then definitely let us know, and do subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay alert on the actual Discord, because we'll be announcing new videos whenever they get released on the YouTube channel. And again, it's again free of cost. It's mainly for helping all all the developers who are there on this scalar Discord to be aware of DevOps, and what are the what are the benefits of being able to be you to be there to learn DevOps. What are the benefits? What are the career opportunities, right? So all those will be covered. And of course, in terms of the career opportunities, there is no dearth of opportunities, because there are fresher DevOps engineer roles, interns. So it's very good to be currently in this role, right? So I hope that everyone is able to understand this aspect. And now we can also take up questions by everyone. And in case you have any specific questions, please do let me know related to this DevOps course that we have announced, or related to DevOps, related to job opportunities, related to the life cycle, or to the or related to the roadmap. So please make sure to ask your questions. I already see that there are some questions in the in the chat, and we'll be taking up them one by one. All right. So the first question is by K. Akhilesh, who's asking, can you tell what is the challenge which is going to be announced for Scalar Discord? So I'm not aware of any particular challenge, but as mentioned that we are going to be releasing an entire dedicated course on Discord, on our uh, YouTube channel for our Scalar Discord community, and we'll be very active on our Scalar Discord as well, to help folks who are just getting started with DevOps, or who are interested to get started with DevOps. So I hope that answers your question, Akhilesh. Then we have test dummy. Does DevOps lifecycle have some specific KPIs? In case you're talking about whenever you talk about DevOps lifecycle, right? There are two main aspects: the continuous integration and continuous deployment. Now, if you were to measure the success of each and every step that is involved in this, right? So starting with pushing our code, right? So we need to ensure that the code that we're pushing, it's done in a proper manner. So that's where the git basically comes into picture. In case there is any error, then it will be scraped, right? So at any step during the entire DevOps lifecycle, you need to be aware of certain metrics that need to be kept in mind. So, for example, if you are doing software testing, right, you have to be able to do software testing in such a way that you do not require multiple rounds of testing, right? Within one round, we're able to get a lot of different issues, right? So, I hope that basically answers the question. Test dummy again, in case you if it doesn't answer your question, then feel free to elaborate a bit more. I hope that answers. Then K. Akhilesh is asking, is GitHub involved in DevOps? So GitHub is very heavily involved with DevOps. GitHub has its own internal CI/CD tool, which is known as the GitHub Actions, and we'll have dedicated sessions on GitHub Actions as well coming up. I think we have already covered one of these sessions on GitHub Actions before on our YouTube channel. One of the first videos that we covered on DevOps and CI/CD. So make sure to watch that particular video. We covered that last year. We definitely GitHub is very deeply involved with DevOps, and any for that matter, most of the companies, most of the large companies have dedicated DevOps DevOps functions in their companies. And even today, a lot of new startups are also having dedicated DevOps engineers or DevOps functions in their companies. I hope that answers your question, Akhilesh. In case there are any further questions, feel free to ask them in the YouTube. And of course, I'll be there post this session on Discord, so you can always connect with me on the Scalar Discord as well to ask your questions. But in case anyone is asking, okay, so Akhilesh is asking another question: how much it will take to become DevOps engineer? In terms of the required skills, as I mentioned, that the primary skills that you require are the core computer science fundamentals. That means learning at least one programming language, and then the most important aspiration, the most important aspects of the DevOps engineer is like learning the core concepts of your computer science, such as like the DevOps, right? Sorry, the most important aspects, right? So things like the computer networks, operating systems, then Linux commands, Linux distro, all of those like are super important. So you need to learn them, and then of course you'll move towards the next step, like things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, and take a look at all of these. And then of course moving into containers, Docker, Kubernetes. Like there are so many different things that are there to become a what which are involved to become a DevOps engineer. But your starting goal should be to master all these different comments, and this particular to be able to do all of that, and then be able to, like, let's say, go ahead and learn the different type of things that you can with this. So I hope this answered your question, Akhilesh. Any other questions by anyone? All right. So Arnav is saying that I'm beginner to the DevOps concept. Is it necessary or important for an Android or web developer to know DevOps? So that's a really good question, Arnav. So see, I mean, probably a few years ago, DevOps used to be a completely separate concept and a completely separate domain in the entire software development life cycle. And that's what we're trying to just help bridge that gap between the core software development and the DevOps, right? And make the development and the operations that's basically releasing a software more tightly bound, so that the release engineers, the maintainers, they're able to very easily understand the development process as well. So as a beginner, you should still be aware of what exactly is DevOps, because let's say if you are a beginner, you might work in a company where there might be DevOps engineers, or there might be such kind of engineers, right? And when there are DevOps engineers, will be interacting with them. So just having basic understanding of what DevOps is should be prerequisite for everyone. Now, when it comes to let's say an Android developer or a web developer requiring to know whether there's something like DevOps, in order to do that, so basically what we'll be doing is that when it comes to a web developer, right, especially if it's a full stack developer, then within DevOps, the entire this DevOps life cycle for a web developer, right? DevOps is also important, especially if you are maintaining or developing your application, right? So if you're developing your application, then basically what will happen is that if you're developing the application, then you'll have to also test it, deploy it, right? And all of this will be done. So basically, in the case of a web developer, yes, there are certain situations where there might be something that is needed, right? So that's basically the web developer role, right? Web developer role. And in even so basically for more DevOps, it will be more related to backend engineer that might be required. And when it comes to let's say the Android developer, also for mobile development, also it's the same person, right? So or the same set of skills that might be required in case you want to deploy your application. You want to know the metrics of your application. That, let's say you're writing the backend for your cat, right? Or basically you're writing the backend for your Android app or for your web app. So for that backend, you will require the DevOps piece. But again, it depends from company to company. But it's completely fine to just start learning and understand how this works. So I hope that answers my question, your question, enough. Uh, I'm more than happy to take up any other questions at this point of time. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Any other questions by anyone? Again, just to kind of repeat that we are officially going to be launching an entire course or entire series on DevOps. So we'll be covering things like CI/CD, Docker, Kubernetes, containers, right? A number of different sessions on cloud systems, cloud providers. So in case you have any questions related to it, feel free to ask it right now, or you can also ask them inside the Scalar Discord. And stay tuned for the sessions, as they will most likely start from next week.
Hi. If you ever happen to build a full stack application, you might have come across common terminologies such as testing, deployment, and all of these different terminologies are part of what we call as CI/CD, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment. Now, you might have used some external CI/CD tools specifically for your projects, such as Circle CI, Jenkins, Travis CI, and all of these tools are great. But when it comes to handling things such as your API secrets or API keys, they can be a bit of a hassle, especially with respect to security. Especially if you have, like, let's say, a GitHub project and you're managing your project CI/CD with the help of these external tools. But that's why today we're going to be introducing about GitHub Actions, which is an internal CI/CD platform built for GitHub repositories that is very easy to set up for any of your projects that you might have hosted on GitHub. So today we are going to be exploring what exactly is GitHub Actions, and then we'll be also showing you live example of how it is very easy to actually set up a GitHub Action CI/CD tooling for your project that is hosted on a GitHub repository. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. So let's get started with what exactly is GitHub Actions. Now, before we move to the world of GitHub Actions, we'll just quickly understand what exactly is CI/CD. Although we have covered what exactly is continuous integration and continuous deployment in our previous session on what exactly is DevOps, we'll just do a basic summary of what CI/CD really is. So CI/CD, as defined, is continuous integration and continuous deployment, and it primarily consists of these 5 different steps. So part of the CI, which is the continuous integration, will consist of the steps of building, testing, and artifacting. So essentially, whenever you're having any piece of code that you're pushing to a particular repository, now before it is actually merged and it is deployed for production, the first thing that will take place is the code will be built. Now, main reason why we are doing is to understand in case there was any kind of an error inside of the code that you actually push. If there's an error within that, or let's say if you have pushed that piece of code, if it actually affects some other part of the code, you're able to actually see and check if that code actually breaks at any point of time. So by building the code, you're able to actually see that. Now, the next step involved in this process, which is the testing, is also really important because it will, of course, let you know if the code actually breaks at any point of time during this entire cycle. And in case it does, then you are able to actually go ahead and make changes to your code to ensure that your code is bug free, and you're able to actually then properly push your code changes without breaking any specific thing within your code. So that's the main part of the continuous integration. And with respect to the deployment, that's where, once you have actually made sure that yes, your code successfully builds and it also passes through all the different test cases that you have written for the code, then you can actually go ahead and push it to production. Now, of course, in case you're working on larger projects, you might have multiple environments inside of your project. That might include things such as development environment, the staging environment. So before pushing your application into production, the secondary stage would be the staging environment, and then finally you will be pushing your code into production. And once it is pushed into production, that's when your actual application will be accessible to the end customer or to the end user. So that's the main idea behind the continuous integration and continuous deployment strategies. And of course, the entire DevOps sort of consists of the dev, which essentially is planning and creating your code, creating into a package. And then, of course, the operation side is where we manage everything from the release cycle, configuring our release so that it is made public, and we can ensure that yes, whatever public version of the code that you're actually releasing, that is going to be proper. And of course, it is also scalable as well. And once you've actually done the release, to ensure that yes, the release was done properly, we are also having management in that. So there are a lot of different tools that help you to sort of monitor the performance of your application, to see how well the application is performing under sustained workloads. So all of that can be managed with the help of DevOps. So without wasting any further time, that sort of brings us to GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is a continuous integration and delivery platform that allows you to sort of automate and build and test, and also automate your deployment pipelines. So essentially what you can do with the help of GitHub Actions is create workflows that allow you to actually build and test every push that you make to your GitHub repository, every pull request that you make to your GitHub repository, and also then helps you to create workflows that essentially look at the deployed pull requests or the merged pull requests that are made in terms of your GitHub repository. And GitHub Actions are like, not just limited to DevOps. They allow you to run workflows whenever any events happen inside of your repository. So like, let's say there could be a GitHub action event that could run, or workflow that could run in case, like, let's say you change some labels inside of your code, or like, let's say even if someone is like creating a issue. So it's not just limited to the DevOps that we are speaking about. And that's one of the major benefits when it comes to using GitHub Actions over like some external like, CI/CD platform tool. And of course, with GitHub Actions, you do get Linux, Windows, Mac OS virtual machines to actually run these workflows. And also you could use your own self-hosted machines to actually run these workflows as well. Now, any GitHub action will primarily have 5 steps, which are events, jobs, runners, steps, and actions. So essentially, these are the main components of your GitHub Actions. And whenever we are creating a new GitHub Action workflow, they could be triggered whenever an event actually takes place. So that's why we are defining these events. And the event can be anything. It could be opening of a new pull request. It could be like, let's say, an issue, like whenever an issue is being created. So essentially the workflow will have one or more jobs that could either run in a sequential order or in parallel. Now, each job will essentially run inside of a virtual runner, or what we call as a container. Essentially, it's a Docker container, or essentially it is like your self-hosted container. And essentially, each of these jobs will basically have one or more steps that either could run a script, or essentially when you will actually define an action. So the workflow itself is essentially a configurable automated process that will have multiple one or more jobs. So essentially these workflows are defined by a YAML file that you write inside of your repository. Now, the event is a specific action that triggers the workflow run. So activity could be like such as like being able to create a pull request. And then a job is basically a set of steps within a workflow that allow you to execute inside of a runner. And each step that you basically define is kind of a shell script that essentially will be executed, and or an action that will be run. An action is essentially a custom application that has been written for a GitHub Action platform that performs a complex a task that you'll be defining. And of course, as we mentioned, a runner is essentially a server that allows you to actually run these workflows whenever they are triggered. Now, let's take a look at each of these different steps as we cover them for events, jobs, runners, steps, and actions. All right. So now we'll start by actually creating a new repository on GitHub. So let's just give this name to the repository as let's say GitHub Actions tutorial. So I'll just call it GitHub Actions tutorial. All right. And I'll just make it a private repository for now. And I'll just add a README to get started. And as soon as I create, we should now see the repository being created. And now within the repository structure, the most important thing that we have to take note of is the actions tab. So this is where you'll find, or you can get started with GitHub Actions for your project. Now, of course, you can set up a workflow yourself, or you can actually use one of the predefined workflows that are provided for both continuous integration, deployment. For example, over here, you can see some starter samples that have been provided for setting up GitHub Actions for, like, let's say, being able to deploy a Node.js project to an Azure web app, or deploy it to Amazon ECS service, or, like, let's say, set up a Terraform CLI, or it could be like, setting up some kind of a Xcode build with Xcode. So there are all of these different examples that are provided. But of course, today we're going to be setting up our own workflow. So of course, just sort of recap, what exactly is the workflow? It's a configurable automated process that will help you to actually run one or more jobs. And these workflows are defined by YAML file. So essentially what you can do is that either you can, if you want to actually set up the workflow yourself, you can click on this button on set up a workflow yourself. And just notice, as soon as we click this, the repository structure. So essentially all the workflows are defined inside the .github slash workflows directory in the repository. And you could essentially have multiple workflows, and that would mean that each workflow will be defined in a separate YAML file. And the more number of workflows that you have, the more number of YAML files that will be defining for your workflow. Now, of course, this gives you sort of a sample basic workflow to get started with GitHub Actions, but we'll ignore this for now, and we'll actually go ahead and create our own workflow. So of course, in order to create one, we just have to basically go ahead and create a new file, and that would be within .github/workflows. And let's say that the name of our GitHub action is going to be main.yaml, let's say. So this is where we are going to be defining our entire workflow. So there are going to be now the 5 different things that we are going to be adding to our GitHub Actions. That includes the event, job, runner, steps, and actions that we covered. So we'll be defining all of them in when we actually define our YAML file. So we'll go over them one by one and sort of uncover what exactly do each one of them actually mean. Now, the first thing that we're going to be starting off with as we define this YAML structure is the first thing that we are going to be adding is the name for the workflow. Now, this is an optional field, but essentially the first step that we're going to be adding is the name of the workflow, as that will appear within the actions tab within GitHub Actions. So we can start by saying, like, let's say the name of this YAML file, the name of this workflow is going to be first workflow. So this is what will actually appear when we successfully create this workflow, and once this workflow gets initiated, this is the name that will appear inside the actions tab. Now, the next thing that we're going to be adding is essentially how will this workflow get invoked, or what is the trigger for this workflow. So for now, what we're going to be doing is, for that, we are going to be defining an on event. So that essentially tells the trigger, like when exactly is the GitHub action supposed to be triggered. So for that, we are going to be saying that let's have a push event. That would mean that whenever you push something to your GitHub repository, essentially a push event. So essentially, as someone pushes a change to your GitHub repository, or, like, let's say that could also mean that we are merging a pull request. So whenever we are pushing to every specific branch, then this particular action or this workflow will be triggered anytime, like, someone actually pushes a code. So that's the next part, that what is that event that should actually trigger this workflow. So that is what we are defining. Now, of course, you could have multiple ways in which you would want this to take place. Like, let's say if it could be an on for, like, let's say merging a PR. So right now we're just doing it for a simple change to the repository. Whenever someone is pushing something, some change to a repository, that's what will trigger this particular workflow. Now, the next step that we're going to be adding is essentially adding our jobs. So basically, this is sort of the main portion, or sort of the main part of our entire cycle. So essentially, jobs is where we are grouping together all the specific jobs that will run inside of this workflow. So we are going to be defining them one by one. So the first thing that, of course, we'll define is we'll start by defining our jobs one by one. So like, let's say the first job that we're going to be doing could be something like a build job, that whenever you push a change, there will be a certain build. So the first job that we're going to be defining is by the name of build job. Now, the first thing that you have to define within the build job is essentially the runner, right? So as part of the GitHub action, the first thing that we're defining is the first job, that is the build, that we have called build. Now, the next thing that we have to define is the runner. So that's something that we can actually define by mentioning the runs on. So this is what will sort of define that on which particular machine will this particular workflow actually run, or this particular job will actually run. So by default, GitHub provides us with an Ubuntu machine. So we can just define Ubuntu latest. So this is basically a machine that will be spun up by GitHub. And whenever you actually invoke this workflow, this particular job will run on this machine or this container provided by GitHub. And it's an Ubuntu container. So of course, you also have the ability to have your own custom machine as well, that you can actually define, that can run this particular job. So like, let's say it could be a machine learning workflow that requires a lot more computation, which might not be possible to be provided by this Ubuntu container provided by GitHub. And so in that scenario, what you could do is you could basically set up your own cloud machine and then use that for this particular task. Now, the next thing that we are going to be defining are essentially the steps. So we have defined that, okay, this particular job will run on the latest version of the Ubuntu Linux runner. So the next step is to actually go ahead and share what are the different steps that run inside of this particular job that we have defined. So in case of the build job, what are the different steps that will be involved? So the next thing that we're going to be defining are the steps. Now, of course, for this simple use case, we are going to be using a GitHub action, which essentially just runs a sample action whenever you essentially push a code. So that particular action is known as the checkout action. So basically, it's known as the checkout action. So it's a very popular action that is used whenever you're like pushing out or pushing a particular code. It's just going to be checking your repository and seeing whether the workflow that you have defined for your repository, if it is actually able to access your repository or not. Because sometimes there might be situations where your workflow might not be able to actually access. So this is a very simple action. As you can see that this is you have been given an example for how to actually use this. So essentially this is using the actions checkout v3. Now you might like sort of wonder what exactly is this actions, right? So essentially there is an entire marketplace for actions that is actually there. So we can just search for actions marketplace on GitHub, and essentially you can actually create your own actions and then submit them on this marketplace, from where you can simply just go ahead and search for specific actions. We'll be seeing later in an example of how you can search for, like, let's say if you want to add a GitHub action for checking linting of your code base. So we'll be searching for that particular action. So the action that we're going to be using is simply just a checkout action that just checks if you have access to your repository, and that's what we're going to be adding in terms of our steps. So the first step that we're going to be defining is the uses. So essentially what we're going to be saying is that, okay, the first action that we're going to be defining is uses. And of course, the action that we would want to use is the checkout v2. So essentially what the uses keyword actually specifies is that this particular step will actually run whatever specific action that we are defining. So like, let's say in this case, we are going to be defining the actions checkout. And as the usage actually said, that we're going to be using the @v3, that's the version v3. So what this particular uses actually mean is that this particular step will run the v3 version of the actions checkout GitHub action. So essentially what this GitHub action allows you to do is just check out your repository on the runner and allowing you to actually run the actions on your repository. So this is what we are going to be doing in this particular case. And of course, you can give this particular step a particular name. So like, let's say that the name that we define is just like, for example, just running a sample GitHub action, run a sample GitHub action. And you can also give it additionally, like, let's say a message that will be there when this particular action actually runs. So the run keyword basically tells you, tells the job to essentially execute, like, let's say a particular command. So of course you could do something like, let's say, just echo and just print something. So in this case, what we are going to be doing is that with run, since we are like telling it to specifically run a command on the command line. So in this case, let's define it as, like, let's say just echoing this workflow ran successfully, like, let's say. So this workflow ran successfully for this particular action. So essentially what this would mean is that once this action actually runs, with this run keyword, we are telling the job to essentially execute a command on the runner. And in this case, it will just print, or it will just echo this particular statement, that is this workflow actually ran successfully for this particular action. So this is what we're going to be defining when we actually run this particular GitHub action, this workflow. So another one that we can actually also potentially add is, like, let's say if you wanted to actually, like, simulate an error also. So we'll see how you could actually do that. But for now, we are pretty much good to get started. So what we'll go ahead and do is that we'll just create this file. And as soon as we create this, if we go to the GitHub Actions, you can see that over here, we now have actually created this create main.yaml file. And of course, what you can see over here is that we have basically gone ahead and okay, basically it says that we saw an error. Let me just quickly check. All right. So basically I just made a slight mistake, and we can just edit this and remove this run. So this should work now. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll start the commit and remove extra dash from run. So we'll just go ahead and commit these changes. And as soon as we define this, we should now be able to go ahead and see the action. Okay. Now, if we go to our GitHub Actions directly and look at the GitHub Actions, you can actually see that we have the first workflow, that is the name that we had provided to our workflow. And you can see that over here, and you can see that workflow is actually running right now. And if I click on this, you can see that essentially it did run successfully. And within this particular workflow, we have the entire summary, which also showcases all the list of jobs that you will actually have within this particular workflow. And the job that we have is the build job. And over here, you can see that the way it started was essentially to first set up the job. And over here, then once it actually set up the job, it ran this specific GitHub action, that is the checkout @v3 action. And then it was able to run that sample GitHub action and then actually complete the job, right? And over here, you can see that we ran this particular command as we ran this particular sample GitHub action, and this is what was printed as part of, like, the run, as we described that what run does. And finally, it successfully completed the action. And now what you'll see is that one interesting thing is that for this particular comment that we created, there is now a tick mark, because this particular GitHub action actually ran successfully. So in case of a place where the action might not have successfully run, you might have seen a cross. And we'll actually see that very soon by seeing how you can actually simulate, like, let's say, an error. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll just first of all just make, let's say, a small change to test this further. Like, let's say, let me just, like, edit the readme and just update the readme once. Readme text, like, let's say, and see what happens. So if I go again back to the actions, you can see that now we have basically gone ahead, and once we have actually updated, you can see a new particular for this particular commit, a new action workflow again has been invoked, because what we're doing is that whenever we are going to be invoking this particular action whenever there's an push event taking place. So since I just pushed the code, updating the README, you can see that for this particular workflow, this is the second workflow that we have run, and it runs successfully. Now, first, let's just try to simulate an error. Like, how does an error actually look like? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll edit our main YAML file. So we'll just go ahead and change this YAML file. And let's say that we'll have a further step within this. And we'll say that the name to which we'll give it is let's say simulating an error. So we'll just say simulating error. And of course, we'll show that how this will actually run and how this will actually behave when we would want to showcase. So we'll say that run, and we'll say echo error taking place, let's say. And now, apart from just providing this, what we'll do is that we'll mention exit one, so that we can actually exit out of this particular workflow. So we'll just add this in the commit, and we'll say adding simulating error in YAML, and we'll commit this. And now let's go ahead and go to our actions again and look at what actually happens once we start running this particular action, this particular workflow. So of course, right now the host is being set up, and of course we have run all of them successfully. But over here you can see that when we ran this particular step for the simulating an error, you can see that we actually get an error message which says process completed, because we used the exit one. So the workflow could not complete successfully, and it came out and it rendered an error. And now for this particular commit, if we see, you can see a cross sign, because this particular commit, this particular workflow did not run successfully. So you're seeing this cross sign, and within the actions, you can actually see that this was an unsuccessful workflow run. So this workflow run actually failed. So this is how you can actually see that whenever if a workflow is successfully run, then you'll see a green tick. And of course, if a workflow has not run successfully, then you'll see this red cross sign that shows us that the workflow run has actually failed. So this is an example for how you can actually set up a GitHub action very simply. Now we'll go actually deeper into how you can actually use some of these actions that are available in the marketplace to actually run, let's say like a linting. You want to let's say create a GitHub action for checking whether the code that you write for let's say Python file, whether it is actually written properly with accordingly with it has proper indentation. So you want to actually check the code for linting. So what we'll try to search for is a very popular GitHub action by the name of super linting, which is a very well-known action. So it's super linter. So we'll just search for super linter, and this is the action that we are going to be using. So it contains a number of different linters in various languages. It has support for multiple languages. So an example today, we'll see how this will actually run for Python, let's say. So now, of course, for each and every action that you visit within the marketplace, you can see some table of contents where it also shows you how you can actually run this specific action as well. So specifically, if you want to actually use this as well, you can see that it shows you the way of actually installing and actually using this particular super linter. So the way we'll actually use it is GitHub/superlinter@ with this specific version. So we'll be actually adding this to our YAML file. So what we'll do is that we'll essentially create a new workflow file, and within that will be basically within workflows. So let's actually go ahead and do that. For now, we'll create a new file, and that will reside within the workflows. So let's say we can call it Python linting.yaml. So .yaml file. So we'll call that this as that. Now, let's say the name that we'll give to the workflow could be linting Python code. this, like let's say we'll give this name to our workflow, then we'll again always invoke this particular workflow on a push event for now. Now we can start by defining our jobs. So like let's say the job that we define is Python linting code. So this is the name of the job that we are creating. Now again, the first thing that we'll start off is by mentioning what particular runner would be there for this particular job. So like let's say it will be again the default one provided by GitHub, that is the one to latest. Then of course we'll just go ahead and give like let's say we'll define the steps. So we'll define the steps over here, and of course for the steps we can simply go ahead and just copy this particular name since we are using the super linter. So we'll just go ahead and define this over here, and let's just use this. So of course what we've defined is basically the name, that is superlinter, and this will essentially use the GitHub superlinter v4. Now of course what we'll go ahead and actually do this is we'll just save this particular linter, and we'll just go ahead and commit this file and see if we are able to actually run this. For this, what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and create a sample Python file. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead, and what we want to do is we want to basically create a new file. So we'll just wait for it to actually run. So over here, what you can see is that if we go to our actions tab, you can see that of course the one that we created for the workflow specifically for the first workflow, that's of course that did not run successfully. Right now what it's doing is that it's actually running the second workflow that we have created, which is the Python linting code. And over here, if we actually go, you'll see that it is pulling the action, that is the super linter action, and that is what is running right now. But of course, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll actually create a Python file. So let's go ahead and do that. So for that, I'll just quickly convert this into this particular GitHub web editor to just visualize our Python file a little better. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and create a new Python file. And let's just wait for this to complete. Yeah. And I think we can go ahead and actually create a new Python file. We'll just call it main.py. And for now, what we'll do is that we'll just simply have a simple print statement. And of course, we'll just say print hello world. And we'll just go ahead and commit this change, create new Python file, and we'll just go ahead and create this. And we'll go back to github.com and just check what happens within the actions. So right now we can see that we have, of course, a particular action that we're still running for this particular code. So it is actually running this particular action, and of course for this one it is successful. But we can now go ahead and check for the one that of course will be now more relevant, since we have created this particular Python file. So it's now pulling the superlinter action, and then it will run this on top of our. So essentially what it's going to be doing is that it will search for all the different type of code files, whichever like language are supported. It will try to find code files for that specific language. In this case, since we have created essentially a Python file, it will be able to detect that we have a Python file, and then it will go through the code and check if there is any linting issue. Of course, in case there is no issue, then it will successfully run the workflow. In case it does find an linting issue, then of course it will mention that it is not able to actually successfully run the action, run the workflow, and it will present the error. And then of course once you adjust the error, or if you make changes, then of course it will run successfully. So we'll just quickly go ahead and see once it runs this successfully. And then what we'll do is we will go ahead and ensure that we we are able to demonstrate this is an example. So of course, as you can see that it is running this workflow right now. And of course, for this particular, it was able to actually successfully run this, since we just had a very simple hello print statement that we had written. And over here, what we'll try to do is that we'll try to go ahead and just add some additional code over here. So let's say just go ahead and do this, and instead, let's say we just add some extra spaces. We define some additional, let's say two variables with the name equal to 5, b equal to 6, and just add some random spaces. And let's say we say sum is equal to a plus b, and then let's say go ahead and say print print sum. So we are just intentionally making our Python file a little wonky, and to check whether our linter actually works or our GitHub action actually works. So we'll again go back to our actions tab, and we'll see whether this actually runs successfully or not. So again, what it will do is that since we have a push event, now it has started to execute. Again, of course, we'll go back and see for the main.py, of course, the linting Python code. So now it should actually be able to see the changes that we have we have made. It will be able to detect those changes, and then since it's running a linter, Python linter, it will be able to detect that the Python code is not compliant with the standard way in which you should actually write the code. So it will be able to detect that, and it will go ahead and not run this particular workflow successfully, because it is able to actually find that specific thing. Now, of course, your actions, while we wait for this particular workflow to run successfully, your action journey does not just stop over here. With GitHub Actions, you can actually also provide secrets, client secrets that you might define within your settings. So for example, if you go to a particular repository settings, you can see over here that we can have some specific actions, secrets that we can actually define. Now, of course, you can actually go ahead and have a specific action secrets that will be used by the GitHub Actions. Now, these secrets could be anything. It could be for let's say an external API that you might be using. It could be certain deployment action keys that you might be using. So if we just go ahead and look at our actions, I guess it is actually running right now. So in this case, it was able to actually successfully run this. So let's see. Of course, in this case, it was able to actually see that yes, all the files did have it did not have any error. So let's try to actually simulate an example where we might actually have an error. So let's say that we are going to be adding let's say extra space over here, and let's say over here. So we'll just go ahead and create this commit. And now let's see if it is able to actually detect. Of course, it will be running both our two different workflows that we have created. So in this case, we are going to be again running this, but of course, just to again share that of course the journey is not just limited to having all of these different actions that we have. So as I was saying, that you can actually also have your own set of actions that you can define. And then of course, if you have some secrets, you can actually define the secrets over here, then you be able to actually leverage and use them within your GitHub Actions. And the way to actually do that is essentially by basically mentioning what that particular secret is. As you basically will go ahead and define your action, you'll be able to basically mention or basically add that this is the secret that you actually want to use. So you can add secrets as well. We'll see in a later tutorial as we take some examples for actually setting up a GitHub action for a Python project, for a Node.js project. So we'll have some upcoming videos that specifically deal with these type of actions. So we'll be defining those as well. So Yeah, I mean, we'll just go ahead and quickly see if we are able to, if our action specifically for this Python linting is able to detect that. So of course, right now it is pulling the superlinter, and then it will run the superlinter on top of the Python code. So it has successfully been able to pull the action, and now it will actually run with for this particular workflow. So let's see if it is able to detect that yes, linting is not properly done. So it is now actually searching for all the different files within this particular, and as you can see that there is no again no error detected. So it uses the GitHub Superlinter at the version 4.9.4. Of course, before we move ahead, we can just also look at how the use case for this particular is being used. So over here, we can just copy these steps. And of course, there is another interesting piece over here with the secrets. So we'll just go ahead and replace the steps over here with the one provided for the sample. So of course, what we're doing is that first we're checking out code using the checkout at the rate v3 action. And then of course, then what we'll be doing is we'll be running the linter on our code base, for which will be using the super linter. And one interesting thing to keep note over here is the environment. So default branch, we can change it to main. Since we no longer use master, we'll use main. One important thing to keep in mind is the GitHub token. So we here, the way to actually access, like, let's say if you have a hidden token that you might have defined. So if we actually go to our repository and look at the settings, you can see the section for secrets where you can actually define some custom environment variables. And these can be accessed by our GitHub Actions directly within our repository itself. Hence that point. So over here, what you're going to be doing is that we are going to be actually accessing our GitHub token from our for our supplinter, and we'll just go ahead and create and commit this particular file. Now, of course, we have created this particular linter. Now, what we'll do is that we'll go ahead and create a new file. Like, let's say we'll just call it main.py. And we'll just, for now, say print hello world. For now, we'll just have a simple print statement. And like, let's say just we'll go ahead and create this print main.py. Now, if you go to our actions, now you can see that there are not just one workflow, but there are two workflows. So the second workflow is the one that we created for our Python, for a linter, which is the linting Python code. And so we have essentially two different workflows that are running for now. And instead of just the one that we created, the first one, which is the first workflow, we have two of them now. So now you can see over here is that within our workflow runs, we have the create Python linting YAML, which is created over here. And of course, the create main.py, which will be running on our main. So if we go to the one that we had created when we had created the file, over here, you can see that what it's doing is that it's first of all pulling the supplinter over here from the GitHub, and then it will be essentially what it will do is that it will scan your entire code base for language specific files, and then it will basically detect the language specific files and scan through the entire language specific file to check whether if there is any issue with linting or not. Now, if it does not find any issue with the linting, then of course it will run successfully. The workflow will run successfully. In case it does find any linting issue, then of course it will be able to report that. So in this case, since we didn't really have any file, it should actually just run this successfully. And of course, it did that. And we see that it ran successfully. Now, of course, it will be running on the Python file that we created. So over here, it is right now, again, pulling the file. And this should actually run successfully because, of course, right now we just really have a single print statement within the Python file that we have created. So over here, you can see that it has started to check out the code now. And of course, it is running it will run the supplinter and check whether the code is correct or not, whether it needs to be whether it's required for any linting or not. Of course, it ran successfully. So we should see this particular workflow also run successfully for the Python linter. Now, of course, as you can see that we get the green tick. Now what we'll do is that we'll change our Python file. and we'll like let's say add a function. So we'll say def add, and this will have like let's say a and b, and then we'll say sum is equal to a plus b, and we'll say return sum. We'll define our a as 10, b as 5, let's say, and then we'll say add a comma b, and we'll define it in a variable sum1, and we will go ahead and actually print this. So we'll go ahead and print sum1. And now let's go ahead and actually just additionally add some error, like like let's say over here add some spaces, extra spaces, just mess up with the linting, mess up with the structure of our Python program, and just comment these changes. And now we'll try to see what actually happens. So this is the workflow that we are going to be looking at, which is the linting Python code. So this should ideally be able to actually detect that the changes that have been made. Of course, this is running on push. So whenever you're pushing any changes, it will be able to detect those changes, and then it will detect the changes that we have made in the Python file. And of course, since it is not properly linted, this particular workflow should not run successfully. So it has completed the pull, and very soon it will go ahead and start to actually check out the code. So in this particular workflow, it should ideally not run successfully. So we should see a cross sign for this particular workflow. Now, while this particular workflow is running, another thing to just keep in mind is that over here, you can see the list of all of your different workflows that you have created. And you have the ability to actually go and either see the workflow file, or even like if you want to actually delete a workflow, you can very simply delete. And of course, if you want to create a new workflow, you can directly go back to this window that we had seen in the first time we had gone to the actions. If you want to use one of the pre-configured ones, if you want to use those, or like let's say if you want to create a workflow for yourself, you can do that. A lot of times you might have seen that, let's say whenever some contributors are contributing to an open source project, they're greeted. So one of the most famous ones is this greetings one. So if you wanted to, like, let's say add this, you can very simply use this greetings.yaml. So this, as you can see over here as an example, this one will be created whenever we create a new issue, or like let's say whenever we're creating a new pull request. So essentially what it is trying to detect is that if a new contributor is creating their first ever issue on a GitHub repository that has this particular workflow running, or like let's say pull request, it will be able to detect that. And we can see that by seeing over here that we have it for pull requests and for issues, and specifically when we are creating a pull request. So the idea is that we are seeing that particular repository token, and we are seeing issue that, whenever a person, a contributor creates a new issue, then it will display this message from the bot that, hey, welcome, will be displayed on that particular user's first issue. And similarly, when they create their first ever pull request, this particular message will actually appear for them on the pull request that they create. So this is an example where the invoking is not just whenever we are just pushing any changes, but if you're creating a new issue, or like let's say if you're creating a new pull request, you'll be able to actually see this. But I think now we should be able to actually see, as you can see, that the workflow did not run successfully. Let's go and look at what error message we actually got. So this actually failed during the linting one. So over here, you can see that the link failed because it also can show the errors, specifically that we have an error on line 2, line 17. Over here, you can see the indentation error that we had there. So of course, now if we go ahead and actually improve our code and actually go ahead and remove these indentation errors, which were earlier there. So now ideally it should work once we remove these indentation errors. So if I go ahead and make the structure better again, and I commit these changes, then it should successfully show us that now the linting will work properly. So this is essentially an example for how you can actually add linting. And of course, we have similarly this entire marketplace that we have for our actions. So let me just quickly show this specific point. So of course, this is just one of the actions that we have within the marketplace for our actions. And you can then search for specific actions for any kind of a use case that you want to have inside of your application. So yeah, I mean, that is essentially what is primarily all about GitHub Actions in a tutorial. Of course, this is not entirely about GitHub Actions. Of course, GitHub Actions expands much beyond just these concepts, but we'll be having dedicated sessions for understanding how you can set up GitHub Actions for a Node project. So for example, if you had let's say a Node backend project and you want to actually write custom test cases, you want to also test how you can actually build the project. So essentially your workflow file will have an command for let's say npm build during the job when it's actually running the job, for testing, for deployment. So we'll be seeing that when we cover GitHub Actions for a full stack project, when we are let's say doing for Python, we'll have dedicated sessions for how you can set up a GitHub action for a Python project, for a Node.js project, and similarly, and which we'll cover in much more depth how you can have for deployment, for testing. So we'll be covering all of that in that particular session. But I hope that you enjoyed this particular session for GitHub Action. Of course, in case you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on the comment section, or you can also reach out to us on our Slack as well. But thank you so much for attending today's session on GitHub Actions.
Hi, today we'll be covering how you can actually integrate GitHub Actions with a Node.js project. Now, in the previous video, we learned about the basics of GitHub Actions. We also saw how you can actually implement GitHub Actions inside of a GitHub repository, and we learned about the main structure of how you can actually define a YAML file to actually run workflows within GitHub Actions. Today, we'll be learning how you can actually integrate GitHub Actions to not only build, test, but also actually deploy a Node project on platforms such as Heroku and DigitalOcean. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. Hi, so last time we covered the basics of GitHub Actions, where we basically took an example of a very simple action to check out the code, and also with a Python linter. Now, what exactly workflow is? A workflow is essentially a configurable automated process that allows you to actually run one or more jobs. And you can basically see the workflow that we have created over here with this main.yaml file. And this is stored inside of the .github/workflows folder. Now, of course, the main constituents within this particular are the first thing being events. So every time a workflow is created, we need to specify a particular event that will actually trigger that particular workflow, and that's what is defined by on. So it could be whether it's a code push, or let's say a pull request is created. And then we come to the jobs part. So essentially, jobs is a set of steps that a workflow should actually execute on a particular runner. Now, of course, this could either be like a shell script or an actual action. Now, of course, what exactly is a runner? The runner is the server that actually this particular workflow actually runs on. So by default, GitHub provides us the Ubuntu latest. And of course, the next is the action. So action is what is actually performing a repetitive and a complex task. It is a custom application that is hosted on the GitHub Actions platform, and actions will essentially do a particular action. And you can actually run multiple actions as well inside of a particular step. And those are essentially the basic constituents of the GitHub Actions. All right, now I'll go ahead and create our repository. So let's name it GitHub Actions node. Let's select the one as myself, and we'll go ahead and make it a public repository, add a readme, and we'll create the repository. And we'll quickly go ahead and clone it to our system. So let's do a quick clone this repository, and we'll quickly go ahead and open this up. So let's go ahead and do this. And now we'll quickly open the terminal. All right. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll just initiate npm. So we'll just choose npm init to initiate our node project, and we'll just give all basic details just to sort of create our package.json. So our package.json has been created. Now we'll install a few important node modules. So of course, if you're aware of how node works, so we have a number of npm, that's the node package modules. So we are going to be installing a couple of ones that are going to be really important. The first one being Express. So Express is a framework within Node.js for doing a lot of web applications. So working with APIs, you can install Express. It's one of the most widely used npm packages. So we'll be installing Express, and also since today we are going to be involving some test cases, we are going to be writing some test cases. So we're going to be installing a couple of other npm packages, including Jest, which is Jest is a really famous open source Facebook created open source testing framework by Facebook, and we are also going to be using Supertest, which is used for testing HTTP servers. Since today we'll be showing how to make an HTTP call, essentially a get and a post request, we are going to be using both Jest and Supertest. So what we'll do is, again, we'll just simply go ahead and install them. So we'll do Jest and Supertest, and we'll just save them. So we'll go ahead and install both of these other dependencies as well. Now, once this is done, we can actually go ahead and start creating our application. So we'll just wait for these to get installed. And as soon as this gets installed, we'll start creating our application. And of course, the idea for today's GitHub Actions tutorial is that we are going to be creating a node project where the GitHub action will be used to actually go ahead and build the project, install all the necessary dependencies, test the node project, and in case the test passes, only then we should be able to actually deploy our project. In case we are not able to pass the test, then the deployment should actually not go ahead. So we'll be seeing some unique capabilities that you can actually install within, that you can actually add within your GitHub action today. So we'll be looking at that as we'll go ahead and actually start creating our GitHub action for this project. So the next thing is that we'll go ahead and create a source directory. And within the source directory, we'll basically go ahead and create 3 different files. So the first one is going to be our index.js. So we'll go ahead and in this, we'll just create an index.js file. Now, essentially what this index.js file will contain is that we are going to be creating the example application where we are going to be listening to a particular port. So the idea is that we will be using Express, using which we'll be able to make an GET request, and that GET request will basically be then used to be imported within this index.js file, and we'll essentially listen at a particular port. So what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be creating another file, and that will be, let's say, app.js. Now this app.js will contain our code for using the npm module, that is the express module. So the way we do it is that we define the variable that is express, and we use the require keyword, which essentially allows you to use a particular npm module that you have installed. So in this case, it being express. Now, next thing that we're going to be doing is that we'll define our app, and we'll define it as the function express. Now, the next thing that we're going to be doing is that we're going to be defining our get request, and in this case, it will be app.get. And over here, now we can define if there is going to be let's say a specific endpoint. So let's say that we can call the endpoint as test node. That means we're just going to be testing out this particular. So since it's a get request, we are not actually sending any body with it. It will just simply we just want to see whether it's actually able to share any response from it or not. Now, of course, with this we'll also send the request and response. So of course over here this will be the request and response. So the response that we actually plan to get is Like let's say we could do something as simple as just get a hello world or something printed out. So we'll actually see how we can actually do that. So what we like to do is we'll actually like to get that in case we do receive or like let's say in case our code is actually correct, what we'll do is we'll send status code of 200, which means that it's a successful code. It's for success. There are different type of error codes, so 200 is mainly used for success. And we'll send a message. It could be like, let's say, yes, the test node endpoint worked. So like, let's say we can say this in case we do get a successful return code. And of course, we'll just go ahead and complete this. And now what we'll do is, since we would want to actually use this module to be available to other functions that we create, we'll actually do module.exports. This allows for this particular module to be used by other functions within our project. So we'll go ahead and actually do that. And now within our index.js file, we'll actually import our app.js module since we have used module6.export app. So we'll actually go ahead and say, let's say const app is equal to require again to import this particular module inside of this particular function. And in this case, we are going to be using app since this module actually exists within our code base over here. So we are able to use this, and then we'll also define a specific port. So like, let's say the port that we define is going to be let's say 3000, or in case you also have like, let's say an environment variable, you can also define that. So we can also define something like .process.env.port number. So in case you have a .env file and you define, like, let's say the port is equal to 5000. So depending on whether there is an environment file or not, either it will take the default value of 3000 or it will be able to actually fetch the value from the environment. For being able to use this, you do require a package known as .env. So you will have to use that in case you do actually have .env file. So for now, I'll just go ahead and delete the environment file. But yes, this should be good enough for getting the port. And of course, just put a semicolon. And now, of course, what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be doing an app.listen. So essentially, it will be listening at this particular port. So we'll define the port, and then we'll define, okay, like what is the response that we want to actually see. So I'll just use the arrow function and define or sort of do a console log on our server side that it basically tells us that yes, it is actually listening. So we can say the app is listening on, and of course over here we can also use something like this. We can define the port. So over here we can simply just go ahead and define this. All right. So this should ideally fetch us the port value, whatever is the port. So we'll be able to see what is being listened to over here. And of course, the next thing is over here, and we'll just simply go ahead and close this over here. All right. So let's see. So this should be good enough. And now what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and create our test case. So since we are using Jest, the way in which we actually define any kind of a test case in Jest is that we basically, for whichever file we actually want to create a test, we'll say file.test.js. So that's the nomenclature in which how we actually create test case in Jest. So over here, what we can do is we'll simply just create a file name as app.test.js, and we'll add a test case for our app.js code. So again, what we'll do is we'll simply go ahead and import our app component that we have created. So we'll do that, and then we'll also import supertest. So we'll say const supertest is equal to require, and in this we'll require supertest, which we had installed, the package for which we had installed initially. And we'll also just have another one that is required, and this request. So this comes from the supertest function. So this will basically just pass our app. So we'll be using this. Now the structure in which how like we always write a test case in Jest is that we have to use the describe keyword. In this we basically define the specific endpoint. So over here, like let's say that we are going to be actually going to be doing the we are since our endpoint that we have defined is a test node. So we are going to be going ahead and defining the test node, and then we'll say that there should be an endpoint. So again, the idea is going to be that what we want over here as we start to actually go ahead and define, we'll simply just again give an arrow function over here and define that. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is that we'll say that, of course, in case we want to describe this particular function, it should actually return a response to us. And in this case, so we'll describe the test as should return a particular response. So now what we'll also want to define is that this should be an async function. So that means that it will first wait for the actual test to pass, and then once we actually get the response, then only it will actually execute it. So we'll create an async await request response structure over here. So over here we'll just define our async, and again we'll go ahead and define our arrow function. And within this, what we'll say is that we'll define our response as, again, we'll wait for a request to actually do that. So we'll say request.get, and within this we'll call the endpoint, which is the test node endpoint. So we'll wait for the response to actually get from this. Now, of course, what we expect the actual response code to be. So we can define our request, the response status. So the status code that we are going to be having, that should actually be, so we'll say to be, the response should be 200. So the actual response that we have, that should be 200. And of course, the other thing that we expect for the response text to be. So the response text that we expect, so this will be the response text, and this we expect to be the thing that we have defined within our value. So that is supposed to be, yes, the test node endpoint worked. So this is what is expected to be an accurate test. So this is what we actually expect. So now what we'll go ahead and do is we'll simply save this, and we can actually go ahead and test this out. So first, let's go ahead and see if this actually works. So we are currently in source folder. So we'll just go ahead and say node. First, we'll just see if this actually works or not. So we'll say node index.js. And you can see that the app is listening on 3000. So let's just go ahead and do localhost 3000 and run the test node. And as you can see that it actually does print, yes, the test node endpoint worked. And we'll also go ahead and test whether our test case also runs. For that, what we'll do is that we'll define both the start script and also the test script to the list of scripts that we have. So here we can remove this default test script and actually add test, because that's what we're going to be using. So in this case, our test file is app.test.js. So we'll define the location of that over here. And of course, we'll also define our start script. So the start script is going to be essentially node, and since our folder lies in source folder, so we can say src. Now if I go ahead and just do, and I'll just come back, and if I say npm start, so this should actually run again. And if I go ahead and clear this, and if I say npm test, so and it does pass. So I think we are pretty good at this particular stage to actually set up a workflow where we want to actually go ahead and install the necessary packages and actually then run a test as well using our workflow. So for that, I'll just also just create a git ignore file, and over here we'll just add our node modules so that we don't have to push them. So yeah, I think that's good enough. Now the next thing, of course, what we'll do is we want to actually set up our workflow. So we'll define our folder. So it will be .github, and within this we'll define workflows, and we'll be defining a file over here. So like, let's say we call it main.yaml. So this is where we'll actually start by defining our workflow. So of course, what we want to do is that whenever we push any particular change to our main branch, we want to actually go ahead and publish those changes, or deploy those changes onto, like, let's say Heroku. So we can always define, so the first thing that we'll define is define the name. So like, let's say we can give the name to our YAML as a Node.js GitHub action. Of course, we can just define it like this, and then of course the next thing that we'll do is we'll define the on. So like, let's say that the event on which it should happen is push, and so whenever the change will take place on push. Now another alternate way to actually also do this is that you can define something like if you want to actually make this particular GitHub action work on only specific branches, so you could do also something like this, where you define the push event, but also whenever you're pushing to certain branches, like let's say this could be main, it could be dev, if you have whatever different type of branches, again you can define. But for now, this is also another way to specifically just define if you are pushing to a particular branch. For now, we'll just go ahead and put it as a general push. Now what we're going to be doing is that we'll look for specific Node.js based GitHub actions that allows you to actually set up a Node.js. So we'll just say GitHub Actions, actions setup Node.js. So the one that we are looking out for is the setup Node.js environment. So we are going to be using this in our GitHub action today. So again, since we have now defined our on and that will be push, so we can go ahead and define our jobs, and like, let's say that this would be the build job, and again the first thing that we'll define is runs on. So like, let's just use the default Ubuntu latest that's provided by GitHub. Now of course we can go ahead and define our steps. So the first thing that we want to do is actually, first of all, use the checkout actions so that our repository is accessible for the workspace to be used for the workflow to successfully run. So of course, this is pretty standard that you'll be using in any sort of GitHub Actions project that you define. So we'll say that this uses, and this uses the actions at the rate checkout at the rate v2. V3, we can use V3 as well, and then we can define the name, and we can define, like, let's say that, okay, use node, let's say, and of course this will use. Now the next thing that we'll define is, once we have checkout from our code, so essentially this is what is going to check out the repository to be accessible. And then of course the next thing that we can define is our setup node. So the way to actually use this is the action setup node v3, and then you define which particular version of a node do you actually want to use. So we can go ahead and actually use this over here. So we'll define and we'll say that this should be, and of course the structure would be like this over here, with, and just make it like this. So what it means is that we are going to be using the setup node that will allow us to actually set up all the required packages, managing our node modules, everything with that. And we also specify which particular version of node are we using. So you can use multiple versions by defining, you could actually use something like a matrix that allows you to have multiple versions of Node as well. So you're defining the version, and as it says that this particular is actually optional. And then additionally, what we like to also define is that once we define our version of Node, we'll actually go ahead and define another name. So in this case, what we can do is we can go ahead and we can actually remove this if you want. So we'll just do this, and we'll go ahead and just give this a name. So let's say that the name that we give to it, in this case, could be install the dependencies. And then, like, let's say we'll run the specific command, and the command would be to npm install, right? And of course, the other one that we can define is to actually run the test. So in this case, this would be run test, and of course we'll be running npm test. So this will give us a good idea. So let's actually go ahead and define this. So this should be good enough for right now, since we have defined our to be able to actually install the dependencies and also run our test. So let's actually go ahead and push our code and see if this actually runs or not. So push GitHub action for Node. So let's go to our repository now and see if this actually materializes into what we want. So we'll go ahead directly to our actions, and over here you can see that we have our Node.js GitHub action. It's starting with this build process. So it's starting the job, and let's see if it actually works or not. First thing that it does is check out, then it uses the node, installing all the necessary dependencies that are there in the project. So it's running this right now, and now it's running the test. So in this case, since the test was successful, it did actually run the build. Now, just to sort of quickly see if, we say that instead of the expect response, in case let's say go ahead and change our app.js and say that yes, the endpoint worked and returned correct value, let's say. And if we change the message that we are sending across this, and let's go ahead and actually let's go ahead and push this code and see if this actually works or not. So we'll say change message, and we'll go ahead and push this. And now let's try to see if we actually this actually works or not. So in this case, our test should actually fail. So we'll go back to our actions, and since we have changed the message, this should actually go ahead and not work ideally. So we'll quickly check if this actually works or not. So we'll just wait for our test to also run and see if that actually works or not. So in this case, as you saw, that the test didn't actually pass, and that is why our build also failed. So that is why our workflow failed. So that is now once we have actually wanted to test whether our test case actually works or not. So now what we want to expand upon this is that we would want to actually go ahead and deploy this project, let's say on Heroku. So now we learn how we can actually deploy this project on Heroku with the help of GitHub Actions, and how you can manage your secrets with the help of GitHub Actions. So we'll just go ahead and actually remove this so that this works perfectly fine, and this will be test node. So we'll just go ahead and save it to ensure this will work in the future. Now, of course, the next part is to deploy and learn how we can actually deploy our project to Heroku. So for that, we'll go ahead and we'll go to Heroku, and we'll actually create our account on Heroku. So we'll go ahead and create a new account on Heroku. So let's just go ahead and do that and define this, and just quickly go ahead and do this, and let's create our account. Now once we do that, I'll just quickly go to my email, and I will quickly go ahead and wait for account confirmation. All right, and I'll quickly set up a password. All right, and this is set up. Now we'll go ahead and just accept all of this, and we are done. Now what we want to do is we want to actually create a new application. So we'll just go ahead and create a new app. We can define our app name as node GitHub Action. So let's see if this is available. This is available to us. That's great. So we'll define this. Now to be able to actually run this, we would need essentially the API key. So every project, so for that we'll have to go to our account settings, and we'll find we'll fetch that over here in this API key. So we'll just go ahead and select this, and we'll be adding this to our GitHub repository. Now the way we can actually do that is by going to our settings and going specifically to our secrets, where we'll be defining a secret for our actions. And we can define a new secret. Now, of course, the value that we're going to be storing is this API key that we have. And let's say that we can define this as the Heroku API key. So we can define this as our secret. And the two other things that we're going to be needing, and of course for that would be, so essentially the Heroku deploy is the GitHub action that we're going to be using. So it's this one. This is the one that we have, the Heroku action, and of course what this is one of them, but you can also use some other ones, such as there is one by Akhil, so you can look specifically for this. Akhil, I think this is the GitHub action for Heroku. Let's see if we are able to find that. Yeah, this is the one. So this is also another alternate one that you can actually use, which is deploy to Heroku. So these are a couple of options that you can actually use. So let's go ahead and use this one. So of course, in this case, what we'd want to do is we'll go ahead back to our main.yaml file and define actually a new job, and which will be named as deploy. So this will be used for deploy. Now, of course, again, this will runs on. We can just copy this, since this will use it the same, and then we'll define the steps. So the steps, of course, would be that, like, we are going to be doing the uses. So of course we'll define the uses over here, which particular action that it's going to be using. So again, since we want it to check out, so we'll just use checkout at 3, and then of course it uses so we are going to be using this one. So basically it uses this, and we can use this configuration that we have. So let's go ahead and actually use this and define this over here. And over here, of course, as you can see that it is going to be using the secrets.heroku API key that we have actually defined right now. And it's going to be using the Akhil DNS Heroku deploy. And over here, we can define the email with which we have created our account. So I'll simply give this over here. And then of course the name of the app that we have given. So the name of the app that we have created over here is node GitHub action. So we can just copy this and paste it over here, and this should be good enough. Yes, but of course one thing that we do need to mention over here is that since we want the app to only get deployed in case our test actually successfully runs, and we wouldn't want this to run in case our app does not successfully run. So in this case, I will actually just go ahead and revert this particular change and actually keep it intentionally wrong, so that we can actually see that in action. So what we want to do is instead we want the deploy to only work, or deploy to actually take place in case our earlier one, that is the build one, actually does run successfully. So in this, what we are going to be using is the keyword needs, and this will be dependent on a particular job that we're running, which is the build job. So in case the build job is successful, only then the deploy will work. In case the build one is not successful, then the deploy will not take place. So let's actually see how this actually takes place. So we'll just go ahead and do this git commit, and we'll deploy add deployment GitHub action. We'll just push this change, and let's see that what happens by going to our repository. And of course this has invoked over here, so let's go ahead and see what happens. So you can see now there are essentially two different jobs that are running. The first one is the build job, and once that is successful, of course in this case it will fail. Since this will fail, and we have mentioned the condition of needs, this actually did not even proceed further. So as you can see that it was actually skipped because the build one was not successful. Now let's go ahead and quickly just correct our message over here in app.js to see if it actually does work for us this time. So let's go ahead and quickly push our code, and we'll just find this correct the error message, and we'll go ahead and push our code. And this time let's see if our action does successfully run or not. So first step is the build step. So in this case the test should actually run correctly, and right now it's setting up the job, and then it will install the packages, run the test, and as you can see that it ran it successfully. Now in this case, since the build did run successfully, now it is starting the deploy script, and let's see if this actually runs correctly or not. So in this case it's setting up the job. First it will check out, and it will get the credentials that we get from Heroku, from the API key. It will take the name and the email that we have provided, and then if everything is correct, it will successfully be able to actually deploy the code onto Heroku. So it's just waiting right now. So it was able to successfully log in into actually Heroku using the API key that we provided with the credentials, and now it's doing all these different steps and actually did run successfully. So that's really awesome. Now if we go to our Heroku, this should, when we go to our project, this should actually show us the step, and you can see that this actually got deployed. You can see over here that the latest activity, the build succeeded, and this has actually run. So if we now go ahead and actually open this deployed app, so as you can see that it does actually work. We get the response as yes, the test node endpoint worked. So that is great. So of course, the next thing that we also can do is that we can actually use something like DigitalOcean as well. So instead of using, like, let's say, if you don't want to use Heroku, you can also alternatively use DigitalOcean. So I'll quickly just sign into the account. So let's just go ahead and sign in with GitHub, and we should be able to see. So of course, what you could alternatively also do is, like, let's say, create a new droplet, and by clicking on a new droplet, you can create a new droplet and actually take, like, let's say, a Node.js based project from the marketplace. So over here you can select, like, let's say, a Node project, so Node.js. You can select that, you can select all the basic plan, and select a volume, add an SSH key. In my case, I already have one, and select all the necessary things that you want, and go ahead and actually create the droplet. Let's go ahead and actually see. So for example, over here we have this node GitHub action that I've already created, and I can actually go ahead and show you how this actually looks by going to the console. So in the case, if you're, like, let's say, using the GitHub action, and you want actually, like, you have your project deployed on like, let's say, DigitalOcean. So of course you can find a specific deploy to DigitalOcean, Node.js, and you'll be able to find specific GitHub actions just for those marketplace. So this can be used over here. So we can actually deploy to DigitalOcean specifically for Node.js based projects for DigitalOcean as well. And in that case, what you'll be needing to submit are essentially four main things. That would be the SSH key for your DigitalOcean, your host, which will be your IP address, your username, the username which will be essentially either like let's say root, or if you have created a custom user, and also of course like let's say the port. So in this case, like it could be port 3000, 5000, and these are the additional details that we'll be putting up instead of like let's say over here in this case we have the main.yaml. So instead of the Heroku API key, Heroku app name, email, you'll be using the secrets, where essentially in your repository, the main things that you'll be putting up inside of your secrets would be over here. The instead of Heroku would be all related to DigitalOcean, and you'll be using a relevant GitHub action for your DigitalOcean project. Of course, that is able to fetch all those different values. So if I actually go to the marketplace, we can actually try to search if we have over here DigitalOcean node. So let's see if we get that, or DigitalOcean deploy. So we can actually see some of these actions that allow us to do DigitalOcean. So we can just search for DigitalOcean as well, and you can see all these different different GitHub actions that can actually be used with DigitalOcean, and you can use either of these to actually go ahead and deploy your project via DigitalOcean as well. And similarly, you'll also find ones for so if we go to like let's say our actions tab, and if you want to create like let's say a new workflow, you can see you can publish Node.js package to GitHub packages. You can find for AWS, you can find for GCP, so you can search specifically for GCP, Azure. So you'll find basically or different types of deployment ones as well, so you can use based on the deployment service that you actually use. So in this case, we showed an example using Heroku, but also you can do it for DigitalOcean or any other platform as well. But I hope that gives you a good idea. Of course, what we did over here was we went ahead and we created a GitHub action for a Node.js project, where it is able to actually test the project and then also be able to actually deploy the project as well. So thank you so much for attending today's session. And of course, in case you have any questions, feel free to share those comments with us in the comment section below in the YouTube. So, and we'll be more than happy to take up those questions. And of course, we'll be taking up a lot more other sessions related to GitHub Actions and DevOps in the near future. So stay tuned for all of those. Thank you very much.
Hello. Welcome to today's tutorial on how you can actually integrate GitHub Actions CI/CD with a Django-based project. Now, in the previous sessions, you have learned about what exactly are GitHub Actions and how you can actually set them up for a repository that GitHub. And today we'll be seeing how you can actually integrate GitHub Actions for a Django-based project and actually deploy your Django-based project to platforms such as Heroku. So yeah, without wasting any further time, let's get started. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a repository. So I'll just choose the repository name as, let's say, GitHub Actions Django tutorial, and we can create as a public repository, add a readme, and we'll just go ahead and create a repository. Now, of course, to get started with creating a Django project, first of all, what exactly is Django? So Django is a web backend framework for Python. So we have some other backend frameworks that have been written in Python, including Flask, Robin. Django is also one of the most commonly used ones, especially if you have a larger scale application. So the model view controller with Django is pretty famous. So it's also quite used for being able to deploy machine learning applications. If you're creating a web-based application
application, and it's a very good backend to use, especially if you are working with a Python stack. So this is what we're going to be using. Now, in order to actually get like a sample application for Django, there are multiple ways you can actually do that. So one of the ways is you could install essentially a Python package for Django, and you can basically do that by using pip install Django. And once you actually do install Django, you can also find a lot of information regarding Django itself on the Django project, because it's an open source project, and you can definitely check it out if you want to dive deeper into how Django actually works. Some of the prerequisites that you would require is installing Python, and you can install the latest version of Python. I think it's Python 3.10, 3.11 that you can install and use locally on your system. So you'll have to install the Python package for Django, and then once you actually go ahead and install that, you can use the commands such as Django admin start project, which essentially creates a sample application for you. Now, that's of course one of the methods, but since today we are also going to be deploying our project on Heroku, so that is why we are actually going to be following this starter repository that has been provided by Heroku. Now, the reasons actually going ahead with this is that, first of all, it is very similar to being able to create your own Django project using the Django admin start project command as well. But of course, this is starter repository provided by Heroku with some additional configurations that allow us to do very easy deployment of the Django project that you have. Actually go ahead and deploy that on Heroku. Now, there are a couple of things that you'll keep in mind. Now, of course, we'll be going through the entire structure of how, like, the Django structure actually looks like. The two things that you'll find over here, if we specifically look at the requirements.txt, is like, defines what all different Python packages are going to be used in a single project. So you can actually go ahead and install all your dependencies using this as well. So the one that we are going to be seeing over here is the gunicorn. So gunicorn is essentially a Python package that allows you to handle HTTP requests. So since Django is a web framework, we'll be using the gunicorn. It is actually like, subset being created from the original Ruby unicorn. So it's used to mainly handle all of that. And essentially we configure our Python file, that is the Django project, with the proc file. This is what is essentially used to actually help you to deploy your project, get your deployed server running. So you need to actually configure that. In case you're not deciding to use this getting started tutorial file, you can set up your own project first with the let's say Django admin project, and after that, what you can actually also do is you can set up your proc file, set up your WSTI and your Gunicorn to enable your web server, the Django web server, to actually get deployed and be hosted on, let's say, a platform like Heroku. Or if you're not, let's say, using Heroku, you're using some other platforms such as DigitalOcean or, let's say, AWS, GCP, you would need that configuration as well. But that comes in handy directly with this starter project that we'll be using today's reference for the Django project. Now, of course, you have a guide as well that you can actually follow. So the simple thing that you just have to do is clone this starter repository. So that is what we'll go ahead and actually do that. First, we'll go ahead and clone this Python getting started repository. Now, of course, that's the first thing that we'll be doing. So let's actually create a new folder inside of the desktop. So we'll just call it, let's say, Django. So we'll just create a new folder by the name of Django, and we'll navigate to this particular folder, and we will do the git clone, and we'll install this starter project. We'll also just clone our repository that we have just created right now for the tutorial as well, and we'll just go ahead and do it git clone, and we will just go ahead and actually and now what we'll do is we'll just simply go ahead and actually copy the content that we have from our Python getting started, and just put that into the repository that we have just created. So I'll just go ahead and put that across in our project, and let's replace this and go ahead and quickly copy over the remaining documents as well. So this should be it, I guess. Let's just confirm. So we have our till runtime.txt, and you can also just copy the git ignore in our project folder. So alright, great. This should be enough. So we'll just quickly go ahead and actually open this repository within our project. So we'll just go to Django, and we'll select our Actions Django project. So of course, what you can see over here is all of the different files that we have. So this is the starter repository. Now each and every Django project has a certain set of files that we usually have. So first, for example, is the manage.py. This is your main file, and then of course all of your files will live inside of the rest of your project. That's mainline in the getting started. And of course, all of your tests, models, views, which are part of the Django project will live in under this particular hello repository. So the hello directory. So now what we'll go ahead and do is, in order to basically set up our repository, you can actually go ahead and get started with following this tutorial. So the first thing that we are going to be doing is we are going to be creating a virtual environment. So let me just quickly go ahead and open up a terminal. So the very first thing that we'll actually go ahead and do is we'll set up a virtual environment. Now this is useful to essentially install all of your dependencies within this virtual environment, and that's one of the things that you usually do with any Python project that you do by creating a virtual environment. So in order to essentially install, you can basically copy this particular command, which is essentially installing the virtual environment Python package. So once we actually do that, now in case you are on a Windows machine, there will be a separate step, but in order to do that either on a Mac or on a Windows device, you can just follow this command that is the source command. And once you actually use this, which goes into the venv and activate, it actually activates the virtual environment for you. So we'll be installing all of our project dependencies within this virtual environment. So once you have done that, of course, if you are to install all of your dependencies, you can actually do that one by one using pip install, and we are using the flag -r for a read, and give the details of the requirements.txt that allows you to install all of the necessary specific Python packages that need to be installed using this. So we are just going to be using this, and as you can see that it has started to install all the dependencies that have been mentioned in the requirements.txt, which is Django, Unicorn, and Django Heroku. So once this is installed, we are good to go. So it has installed all the necessary Python packages. Now, of course, the next step that we have to do is, in order to basically enable your Django project to collect all the local assets, that essentially, all what do we mean by the local assets? It's all the static files that we have. That includes things such as your HTML files that will essentially serve as your static files, and of course anything related to your JavaScript files, your styling files, or let's say you have some static elements such as images, videos. All of those need to be collected by Django. So for that, we actually run this command python manage.py collect static that allows you to basically collect all of your files. We'll go ahead and use this over here, and this should allow us to copy all this static files so that Django can actually use them. So at this point of time, we are pretty much set up with our project. Now in order to this test run our project, we can go ahead and just say python manage.py and then run server. That allows you to actually run your project locally inside of your system. So that will be exposed at the endpoint localhost 8000. So we just simply have to go to localhost 8000, and you can see that this is the project landing page getting started with Python on Heroku. So this is what is the starter project, and you can actually see all the static files that we have within the templates. So these are all the templates that we have. For example, this is the index.html that you see over here, that is rendering over here, which you can actually also see in this particular file. So once we run that command for being able to actually go ahead and use like the collect static, it collects all the static files that we have, and it will use them so that we can actually start using them with our Django project. So now that we are done with this, we can actually go ahead and test out a few different things. So essentially, since we are going to be using the CI/CD tool, the first thing that we'll actually go ahead and do is we'll create our .github folder, .github directory. So let's go ahead and do that, and within this we'll define our workflows directory, and we can create a file name known as django.yaml. So this is where we'll be declaring all of our YAML configurations, and that's what we're actually going to be doing. So the first thing, of course, that we'll start off is whenever we create any YAML file, we specifically for a GitHub action, the first thing in the workflow that we define is the name. So over here we can define the name as let's say Django GitHub action, which will allow us to actually go ahead, build, test, and look for linting, and actually go ahead and actually deploy it to Heroku as well. So we'll start off by this. Now, of course, again, we need to, the next thing that we actually go ahead and define is what exactly, when does this workflow actually needs to get invoked. So of course, for doing that, we will basically go ahead and define on. So whenever a specific action will be performed, in this case, like let's say that we want to do that on a push event, and we can also of course go ahead and define it has to be on a particular branch, or like let's say if it has to be specifically invoked, or the workflow has to run on a particular pull request. So the syntax that you can actually follow for that would be that the first thing that you'll do is you define your push, and additionally you can also define the branches on which this should be invoked instead of having it on all the branches. So like let's say I want it for main. Similarly, if you also want like let's say this to get invoked on a pull request, so you can actually define that as well, and then you can define on which particular branch as well if you want. So these are some of the ideas. For now we'll just keep it simple, and we'll just define it as an on event on a push event, that when it will basically get invoked on a push event. Then we basically have to define our jobs. So the first job for us would be the build job, to ensure that yes, everything is configured perfectly. So the first thing that we'll define is runs on. That will enable us to know, okay, what is the runner. So in this case, let's use the default runner that is provided by GitHub, that is the Ubuntu latest one. And then of course the next thing that we can actually also do over here is, especially because with Python you might have different versions of Python. Now we have a concept within GitHub Actions known as GitHub Action Matrix. So we'll just quickly show what exactly is a GitHub Action Matrix. What it allows you to actually do is that in case you might have multiple jobs, you can actually run them parallelly by defining this matrix. And the way you actually do is that within your job, you define the strategy keyword. And in this, you can actually define different types of job configurations. So an example for that would be, let's say if you want to test your Python project on different versions of Python, let's say Python version 3.8, 3.7, 3.9, 3.10. So you can actually define this within this strategy, and you can define that how many jobs, like separate configurations actually need to run at the same time parallelly. So that's what we are going to be just introducing today inside of this particular one. So we can say that we can define the strategy, and within the strategy, the first thing that let's say we can define is that how many jobs should actually run parallelly together. So let's say in this case we can say it's for 2 jobs, and then we can say what's the matrix, since the matrix. So we can say that we want to actually test our project on the Python versions, let's say 3.9. So we can define, let's say 3.9, and let's say 3.10. So these are the two different versions of Python on which we'll actually test our project. So essentially, if your project has 2 different versions, and of course it will actually test them on these 2 specific versions, on Python version 3.9 and Python version 3.10, and it will test and run this workflow for both these Python versions and test out your workflow on both of these 3.9 and 3.10. Now, of course, once we have done this, we can go ahead and actually start defining our steps. Now, once you actually set up the Python version, we can go ahead and actually define. So, of course, the first thing that we'll do is we'll use the checkout action. So, users, and we'll say check action @actions checkout @v3. This is used to check out our code. And the next one that we'll actually do, first of all, give it a name as, let's say, setup Python version. And of course, what we can actually say is over here we can define this as setup for a particular version of Python. So in order to do that, we can say let's say matrix dot Python version. So essentially, this is what will serve to define, okay, which particular Python version we are actually running this particular action for. So this is what we'll be doing. And then of course over here we'll define the users. So we'll define the users as, let's say, the actions. And for this what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be using an action known as GitHub Actions, known as the setup Python. Now this allows us to actually go ahead and set up Python application within our GitHub Actions. It allows you to download and set up Python packages directly from the help of this particular Python package from this GitHub action. And you can do a lot of other things, such as manage your path, manage your Python packages, define which particular Python version you're going to be dealing with. So all of that can be set up with the help of the setup Python GitHub action. So this is the one that you should actually look at. So for this, what we're going to be doing is we are just going to be using the actions setup Python, and then we can use the latest version. So just to confirm what's the latest version, we can go ahead and look at this particular Python on the GitHub Actions. So we can view this on the marketplace. So over here, you can see that the latest version is 4.1.0. So we can just go ahead and copy this and set this up over here. So this would be at the rate 4.1.0. Now the next thing that we'll go ahead and actually do is we'll define that, okay, for which particular Python version do we actually want to use it with. So we'll define with, and within this we'll say the Python version will be fetched from ones that are available right now in the matrix. So we'll essentially take them from here. So we can define this from matrix.python version. So this will allow us to fetch the version for a specific version of Python. And the next thing that of course we can define is again the name. So we can define, let's say, if we want to install all of our dependencies, because that is what we want to do whenever we run this on the Ubuntu latest runner. So for that, if you want to install all the dependencies, we're going to be running the following command. So this essentially would be the Python, again we'll be running this. So this would be Python, and of course we can just define this over here. So we'll just go ahead and do this. So we'll define this as Python and then -m, and then we'll install all the packages, and of course use the upgrade to upgrade them to any particular version. And this is to also upgrade the version of pip, and beneath this we can say pip install, and again using the -r with the requirements.txt to install all the requirements that are going to be there. And once we have actually done that, the next thing that we're actually going to be doing is something quite interesting. So of course, whenever you're pushing out any code, you would ideally want to actually also lint your code. Now in the previous sessions that we took on GitHub Actions, we showed that you can actually use let's say one of the GitHub Actions that actually allows you to do Python linting, which is essentially for Python linting. So you could essentially use something like a Python linter. But what we are actually going to be doing is that we'll be linting our code with something known as Flake8. Now, what exactly is Flake8? It is essentially a library that allows you not just to actually do linting for your code, but it also actually can share some programming errors for some undefined variables, functions, and also looks at your coding style. That's essentially the linting. So it's a much more advanced version. So we can actually define Flake8. So for doing that, the first thing that we'll actually go ahead and do is we will install the package. So we just have to go and do pip install Flake8. I'll just define Flake8 over here, and we'll download this particular library. So we'll define Flake8. And then so since we have used Flake8 now essentially Flake8 allows us to set up some configurations in order to, let's say, skip reviewing some files, because there can be certain times when you might not want to, let's say, specifically search for linting for particular files. So we can actually do a configuration of our Flake8, and for that we'll be defining a .flake8 file. Now over here I have a default configuration that allows you to exclude certain types of files and then ignore certain error codes that might usually be there. For example, like let's say it could be for some undeclared variables. So this is just a sample file that we're going to be using, and we'll be defining our .flake8 configuration file over here inside of our project. So we'll go ahead and say .flake8, and we'll define our configuration over here. Now, in order to actually go ahead and test it out, we just can run the flake8 command. And as you can see that it still actually does show us some of these errors that or warnings. So we can actually go ahead and try to see if we can configure them. For example, if we go to the admin.py, it says that the Django.contrib admin has not been used. So you can simply just go ahead and comment that out. Then we have the tests.py. So over here it says that the user has not been used. So we can simply just go ahead and remove that. And for example, over here in views.py, the HTTP response has not been used. So we can again go ahead and do that and comment that out. And over here, for example, again in getting started, we have the URLs in which we don't need at this moment include. We can just simply remove include for now. And if we run flake it again, as you can see that this time it did not comment anything else. So that means we're good to go from the flake it. So essentially going back to our YAML file, if we want to set up the next action as to actually make sure that our code is written properly, to actually go ahead and lint it with flake it, we can define the next name as lint with flake it, let's say. And this one again, we'll use a run a command to actually go ahead and run this. So we'll say run, and over here we'll define flake 8 dot, and this will allow us to go ahead and actually test out our code. So first let's actually go ahead and test this much of our GitHub action that we have actually prepared. So first we'll just go ahead and push our code, and we'll just commit this commit this code so far. So we'll just say commit and say add initial files, and we'll go ahead and push this. And as soon as we push it, we should see it getting project over here. So, and we should go ahead to our actions, and you can already see, okay, so second, all right, so let's just check if the .github file has come or not. Right. So actually this should be over here, actually outside. We'll just move it outside of the project folder, and then just go ahead and commit this again, just to restructure this. And we'll just go ahead and push it, and now it should actually show up as we go ahead and add it over here. Oh, my bad. So I think the .github folder is still over here. Alright. So let's actually move the .github folder right over here, and we'll define our workflows within .github, and we'll just push this. We'll go ahead and push this. So now it should actually come up properly. So yeah, there we go. We should see the action coming here. So you can see right now we have two different ones. So one is for build 3.9, and this is actually starting the job, and this should go ahead and actually okay, so it does give an error. So let's actually see. So it says that actions Python setup Python version 4.1.0 is not, cannot find it. So let's just quickly see because for some reason it's not able to do that. So never mind, we'll go ahead and actually change it to actually this should have been version 4.1.0. So let's just make this small change, and let's see if this actually works. So let's go ahead and check out our project. We'll go back. This time it should work. So we'll go back to our latest workflow that is running right now, again for version 3.9. Using the checkout at this moment, going ahead and installing all the dependencies. Then it will try to lint it with flake 8 once it installs all the necessary dependencies. So it says that flake 8 is not installed. Oh, that is because we didn't actually include it in the requirements.txt. So we should just go ahead and install flake 8 as part of the requirements.txt, because it, the runner was not able to actually find that. So we'll just go ahead and say commit and add flake 8 to requirements. Perfect. So this should actually work. So we'll just go ahead and push this code, and this should show up inside of our action now, and this should actually work perfectly fine. All right, let's see as it starts. So hopefully this should actually work. So it will now install all the dependencies, and then it'll start to actually lint it. It will do the lint checking with flake 8. Right, so it says successfully installed. So for some reason it says that installing all these successfully, the error was cancelled for some reason. Let's just go ahead and rerun our job just for both these versions. Let's just see if there's something wrong happening right now. Let's just quickly cross check. We have version for build 3.9, So as you can see, like, once the host runner that's provided by GitHub it's set up, then it will of course go ahead and install all these dependencies on the Python package. All these dependencies will be installed in this runner. It's currently installing all of these different dependencies. So now we'll just go ahead and test, and we can see that the job has actually successfully run. So what we can actually go ahead and do is we'll move to our next step, and that is actually also write something related to test. So of course, so far what we have done is we have checked out the code, we have gone ahead and we have basically installed all the dependencies, and then of course finally we can also have another one that would be the name. We'll just define the name as let's go ahead and do that. That's the name, and the name would be essentially would be to run the test. So running the tests, and of course the command for that would be run. And then of course, so essentially how you can actually run tests within Django based applications is by using the Python manage.py. So of course you're always going to be using that, but you can write test. So this will take a look at all different files that have the test. For example, over here we have in this over here test.py, so it will try to find all of them, and then it will go ahead and actually do the test for you. Now we can just probably comment this one and just test it out without that. So we can just run the command over here. First try to do that, python 3 manage.py, and then we'll say test. So if we run this, you can see that right now there are 0 tests that has found out. So this can be used. So this is with respect to all of the things that we want to do with respect to the CI/CD, that is being able to check for the dependencies in the code, installing them, linting our code, running our tests, of course. And then the next step that we'll be moving towards is actually going ahead and deploying our code. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is since we're going to be using Heroku, so we will actually create an account on Heroku if you haven't already, and you can log in into Heroku. In my case, I have already actually created an account within Heroku, so I'll just go ahead and log in into my account. I'll just actually put this on later for now. So we'll just cancel this and we'll go ahead to our dashboard. So we'll go ahead and actually create a new application. We'll just call it Django GitHub Action. So let's see if we can create this. Alright, great. And we'll go ahead and actually copy this. Of course, we'll be using this information. So there are going to be 2 things that we're going to be doing. The first one being we're going to be setting up actually 2 different environments secrets inside of our project. So we'll go ahead and go to our secrets and going to our actions, which we'll be defining these secrets. So the first one is the name of our app. So in this case, we can say that we can call this as the Heroku API name. So let's say actually app name. That would be a better representation. We'll create this, and then of course we can always go ahead to our account and get the API key for our account. That will be used to actually help to be able to for our workflow to authenticate and log in into our I'll just go ahead and regenerate the key just for this reference, and let's actually go ahead and copy this key, and we will go ahead and create a new repository secret. We'll give the name as the Heroku API key. So we'll give it the name of Heroku API key, and we'll go ahead and we have created these 2 repository secrets that now we'll be able to actually utilize from our application. So the next step is that of course the first thing that we did was create a job for the build. Of course the next job that we'll create would be for deployment. So we can actually call that as deploy, let's say. So we'll call that as deploy. And there are certain GitHub actions that you can use. Again, there are a few that are specifically for Python, and you can search for Heroku. So in order to actually deploy Django to Heroku, So you can see over here, one of the famous ones is the Heroku Django deploy. Again, the usage you can see is pretty simple. The first thing that you do is use the checkout, and then you share a few different items such as the app name, API key, the Heroku email address with which you have created the account, then whether you actually want to use a Git, or like let's say it has some other options such as being able to also use a Docker container registry in case you're using Docker for containerizing your application, and then of course the branch that you want to use alongside your project. So of course nowadays we are not supporting master, it's main. So we'll be using one of these GitHub actions today. So the first thing within our job is to actually define, again, the first thing would be to runs on, to define what is the runner. So in this case, we'll define the runs on as, again, Ubuntu latest. And the next thing we'll define is the name. So of course, our name for this particular is to actually go ahead and deploy our application to Heroku. So, and this being a Django based application. So of course, now starting with the steps. So the first step is, again, as usual, the checkout. So you can just simply go ahead and use this checkout. Of course, that's great. The next thing that we'll go ahead and actually do is we'll give the name. So we can actually also give it this give a name to it. So that would be checkout. The next one that we'll give is actually defining our action that we want to give. So in this case, let's give it an action of deploy. So the one that we are also going to be using is one provided by Aki Leishtina. So there is this one that is quite famous that actually works with multiple ones, which is the Heroku deploy. So we are going to be using this in our repository. So here you can see how we can actually go ahead and use it. So we can just copy the usage from here, and we can define it over here. So this uses this, and we can just forward this. All right, that should be fine. So this is actually the action that we are going to be using. And over here, the app name, instead of this, we can simply put the secrets, and instead of this, we'll have the app name. And then over here, we'll define our email. So in this case, this would be my email that I'm going to be putting in. There you go. So we have put in all of this information. Now, apart from that, the additional thing that we can also define is which particular branch do we want to use. So in this case, the branch that we'll be using is going to be main branch, and this should be good enough. So let's actually go ahead and check this out if we are actually able to run this. So first, let's just go ahead and deploy our code. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So just add deploy step in GitHub Actions, and we'll go ahead and push this. Now let's see if this actually can work. Let's go ahead and see our action. Okay, so let's just refresh. For some reason it already just crashed. Oh, there's an error in the syntax. Let's just go ahead and see line number 36. All right, so this should be good enough. Just quickly check if this is fine. So we have the step, we have the deploy, and we'll be using this. All right, let's just go ahead and push this change. Let's see if this works. We'll go ahead to our actions, and okay, there appears to be an issue. The YAML syntax on line number 35. Let's go ahead and check that. This is actions at the checkout v3. So let's just quickly check what might be the issue. So this is the name, then we have provided the actions, checkout v3. This appears to be fine, and then we have the name. Alright, this should be fine now. Alright, so let's go ahead and push this. Alright, so once we have pushed this, let's actually go ahead and see if this actually works. So the first thing is the build being running. Let's just see if this works. So it's installing all the dependencies, running the lint, and all of this does work. So this should work properly, and now it's going ahead and setting up the deploy. So it has already checked out the code, and now it's proceeding with deployment to our Heroku application that we have created. So it's currently in the process of deployment. So our first thing, that is the build, actually did work correctly. So it's now going ahead and trying out the deploy. Let's see if it is able to do that successfully. So it will first, of course, log into the Heroku using the credentials that it is able to fetch from the GitHub secrets, and then it will proceed towards the next step. That is actually going ahead and checking out the code. So here, as you can see, that it was able to actually successfully deploy. Now, if I go back to our account settings, and if we go back to our applications in the dashboard, and we check out the Django GitHub action, if we open up the application, as you can see, it's deployed. We should ideally see, yes, so this is the deployed application. As you can see that it has been deployed onto Heroku. Now if I push any changes, for instance, let's say if I go to our secrets, let's say to one of the templates and to our index template, let's say with GitHub Actions tutorial. So let's actually go ahead and save this, and if you make a small change, we'll just say we have made change to index HTML, and we'll push it. Let's see if it actually is able to update the application, and we are able to see that over here. So we'll go back to our actions right now and see if it actually is able to run this successfully. So right now it's building, and then of course it will go ahead and also deploy it. Now another thing that you can actually do is provide a dependency. Like, let's say, of course, you wouldn't want to deploy a code that does not pass through the test cases, or it does not actually properly build. So you can use the needs where you can actually make one particular build actually be dependent on other. So if you have, let's say, two different type of jobs, you can actually make the deploy job dependent on your build job. So only if the build job will actually pass, only then your deploy will actually run. So over here you can see that it has successfully deployed. So we should actually see that changes appear over here. So if I refresh, you can see that we got the updated index.html page with the GitHub Actions tutorial. So this way, whenever you make some changes to your code and you actually go ahead and push it, you can see that the the automated pipeline that actually runs. So in order to just go ahead and demonstrate the other part that I was showing, basically telling you all about, is essentially the way to be able to actually handle scenarios where you might need one of your build steps to actually be dependent on another one. So how can we actually go ahead and handle such kind of a scenario? So that is what we are actually going to be looking at in terms of how you can actually handle such kind of scenarios where you might have one or more dependent issues. So we'll go ahead and we'll go back to our GitHub action and to our workflows, and over here within the deploy one, right, we'll basically use the needs, and essentially in that case we have to define which particular job you actually want it to be dependent on. So in this case, let's say that we are going to be using the build, and over here what we'll do is just to sort of test it out, we'll make a conscious issue with one of, let's say, for example, we can uncomment this, and if we run flake right now, it will actually show us. So what we'll do is that we'll now just push this change, and we'll see that how this actually affects the deployment. So we'll say added needs to GitHub action, and we'll push this change, and let's see how this actually handles. So we'll go back, we'll go to our actions again, we'll see at the latest workflow run, and over here, of course, we see our summary. So right off the bat, you can see that we do not actually see our particular step, that is the job for deploy right before. So first it will actually run the build, and only then later on it will actually showcase if this is successful. So as you can see that the process actually just failed, and that is why, since it failed, the deploy one wasn't actually even done, it was completely skipped. Similar to this, you can actually go ahead and test out deploying your Django project to other actions as well. So for example, if you just go to the GitHub Actions marketplace, we can specifically see for Django and let's say DigitalOcean. So if I specifically search for this, we can specifically search for, let's say, Django, and you can see there are like, ones for migration checker specifically, right? Because sometimes you might want to migrate your data. So there are all these different types of actions. And of course, you can also like, create your own action. We'll create a video in the future where we'll show you how you can actually create your own GitHub action and then get that published to the GitHub Actions marketplace as well. But yes, you find essentially dedicated actions for a specific use cases, and of course one of the most popular ones being the one that is the setup Python, which allows you to actually go ahead and do a lot of different things, such as being able to manage dependencies, install packages, and then set up like the test and all. So you can manage all of that with the help of the setup Python. But yes, that is what we want to first of all showcase in terms of how you can actually set up your GitHub action very easily with the Django based project. Of course, the Django based project might have a lot more other dependencies. You can actually combine, since it's a backend framework, you can combine it with, let's say, a front end in React or in Next.js or any other framework, and you can write additional or separate workflows dedicated for your front end. Let's say if you want to deploy your front end project to Netlify or to Vercel, how you can do that? You can again very similarly define your credentials, because you have dedicated actions, let's say for front end frameworks like Vercel deployment. Similarly, you'll have them for Netlify, and again it's very easy to use these. You just have to again define your secrets, and it will be able to fetch your secrets and then able to go ahead and do all these different activities. And of course, we just showed for Heroku. You can use it for any other cloud platform like Azure, GCP, AWS, and you can automate all of that with the help of GitHub Actions. But of course, GitHub Actions are not just the specific CI/CD tool. There are other tools, but of course, what makes it useful is that if you are having a lot of GitHub projects, then you get the CI/CD tool inbuilt to your GitHub repository with the help of GitHub Actions. So in case again you have any questions with respect to our tutorial on GitHub Actions with Django, do feel free to ask them in the comments, and we'll be coming up with a lot more other GitHub Actions and of course CI/CD related content in the near future. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, welcome to another video on GitHub Actions. So far we have looked at what exactly are GitHub Actions. We have also actually created examples for GitHub Actions for a Node project, for a Django project, and today we are actually going to be seeing how we can actually utilize GitHub Actions for a MERN stack application. It's essentially being able to use CI/CD with the help of GitHub Actions for a full stack project, and we'll be taking an example of a MERN stack project. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. All right. So today I have this repository created for a MERN stack project, and the goal that we'll try to achieve for today will be to actually go ahead and be able to create a GitHub action YAML file for being able to actually have the CI/CD for both the front end and also for the back end. So we'll be exploring the entire from how we can actually do that. Specifically for deploying our backend, we'll be deploying it to Heroku, and for the front end, we'll be deploying it to Vercel. Of course, there are multiple other ways in which you can actually do that. You can deploy your entire MERN application to let's say a DigitalOcean server and deploy it with the help of Nginx. Or you could also deploy it on let's say different type of cloud services like AWS, GCP, and Azure. But of course, in all of these different use cases, the functionality of actually the GitHub action itself that we'll be writing, the jobs that we'll be writing, they are pretty similar. So it's mostly how you want your application to get deployed. And so we'll be specifically looking at how that can actually be managed. So the first thing that we'll just go ahead and do is we'll go and take a look at the code that we have for this MERN application. We'll be also writing some of the logics for the MERN application. And again, the application is going to be relatively simple. So in the code repository structure, you can see that we have a client folder that will have our React application that will be separate. But right now, what you can see is on the outside is the backend application. So the backend is a simple Node application, and over here you can see this is a very simple Node application in which we have utilized some of the Node modules such as Express, CORS, which is for cross-site origin, and then you can see that we also have actually included one model which is Connect Mongo, which will actually help us to connect to our MongoDB instance. Since it's a MERN application, we'll be also having a database, and for which we'll be using MongoDB Atlas. And apart from that, we have just defined some few API endpoints, which we'll also be actually writing, for which we'll be writing the logic. And that's pretty much simply what's happening in this server.js. Now, in terms of what application we are actually building, so it's going to be a simple note-taking application in which we just actually have one simple collection. So whenever we work with MongoDB, we always define collections, because since it's a NoSQL database. So we have actually defined the schema of our database over here, which we have defined as user schema, and which will essentially have just two parts. So one is the author and the notes. So we are just going to be having one collection, and it will have author and the notes. So essentially, whenever on the front end we'll be creating a new note, we'll just have to add what's the author and what's the note, and that should be good enough. And specifically, of course, with relation to how we can actually connect our backend to a MongoDB instance. So over here, we have this defined function that is connect to database, where we will actually provide a Mongo URI, which essentially is a connection string that provides you the username and password, and of course, at the same time, also the database name and the URL for your MongoDB URI. Now, normally if you are working locally, you'll be providing the local URL, like let's say HTTPS localhost, and then of course whatever is the port number. Or if you're utilizing some online tools such as MongoDB Atlas, you will be providing that. So we'll have to basically create .env file where basically we'll be having the environment variable as the Mongo URI. We'll be filling this up later, but this is what is required inside our connect mongo.js file, and this particular file is actually referred inside of our server.js, where you can see that we have created this variable known as this constant variable as connect, and we then basically use that to connect to our MongoDB instance once we start running our application on the specific port on which we actually want to run it. And then of course you can see over here that we basically have defined two different type of functions, which are the two different endpoints. One is the post and one is get. So post will be used for actually creation of new posts, and get will be actually used to fetch all the different posts that are actually possibly there. So we'll actually go ahead and we'll start to actually define these functions. So the first one being the endpoint being the post endpoint. So of course what we want in this is that from the front end we'll basically accept or expect a request body. So that request body should contain both the author and also the actual body of the note that we want to define. So we can define it as, and basically we can define it as the rec.body, which basically is fetching our body. And then let's say we can go ahead and define a new notes that will basically contain our body. So basically the request body will contain both the author name and also the actual note itself. So we can actually define it as something like this, that our new note is going to be a new user. So essentially in the schema, we have defined our model as user. So within server.js, we basically go ahead and define our new user. And of course, within this, we'll be defining what exactly should be there. So within this, the first thing that we should define is that the author for the user would actually be the new notes dot author. And similarly, our apart from that are actual notes. So basically the notes would be equivalent to the new notes dot notes. And this way we are fetching the value that we get from our basically the value that we get from our front end, and we are able to actually save that inside of a new collection value. So since our collection is the users collection, we'll be adding a new value to our collection, and we'll just wait for this to actually get saved. So basically we'll just use the save function, and this will help us to actually save our data, and we can actually just go ahead and return res.json to be true in case it is able to actually successfully save our data. So this should be good to basically provide an endpoint, a post endpoint for creation of new data that gets added to our collection. And similarly, the next one is actually to be able to actually fetch all of the list of data items that are already there inside of our collection that has been saved to our MongoDB, and we want to just go ahead and fetch it. So we can just define something like a const note list, which will fetch the list of all the different all the different database values that are already there. So we can just use an async await to actually wait for all of the different values that are there. So we can just use the user.find function to actually fetch the list of all the different endpoints. And essentially what we can do is we can simply just go ahead and return this. So we'll be returning a basically in a JSON file. So the JSON will contain the list of all the different will basically contain the list of all the different previously created notes, and of course the coupling values of the author and the actual content of the notes that is there as part of the user schema that we have actually created. So this particular endpoint will go ahead and fetch the list of all the different notes that we have actually created. So these are the two specific endpoints that we'll be utilizing in our code base. Now, if we quickly take a look at our client repository, over here you can see that it's a React application. So over here we have defined our components and our main app.js, and over here you can see that we have imported all of our components. So we'll just quickly go over all the different components that we have. So starting with the header, which will just have the logo, or basically the header for our application, and of course the footer that of course is pretty self-explanatory. Then we have defined a component for actually taking a new note input. So over here the main aspect of this, what you'll see over here, is that we have defined two different type of inputs. So the first one is to actually take an input for the author, and similarly the next input that we'll be taking is for taking inputs for notes. And we'll basically go ahead and utilize a function which is handle add, and over here you can see that basically this on click function, when we actually run it, it is taking the value. So, and the handle add function will basically take the values from the input that we have defined from these input from the values for the notes and the author, and this will be utilized when we are making a call to our backend from our front end. And basically this is the note input. Then we have defined a node block, which basically will define both the author and the notes that are going to be there. And then we have one final component that we'll discuss, and that's the node div. And this is the area where we'll be actually showing all of our notes. The idea is that as we take our get request, which essentially takes all the notes with us. So we have just defined a JavaScript map that essentially takes all the notes. So we have defined that, and we are able to take one note at a time, and then we'll go ahead and showcase the values. Now, all of these components have been imported over here inside of the app.js function. So basically what we are going to be doing over here is we'll be starting off by defining our use effects. So within this, we'll be defining the get request to actually fetch all of our notes that we have defined so far. And the handle add will actually, this function will allow us to actually add new new nodes that are going to be used. Since we have two different endpoints, we'll be defining both of them over here inside of this particular function. All right, so we'll start by first defining the values within this use effect that we have defined. So we here within this, we'll define our access request that will allow us to actually fetch the list of all the different nodes that we have. So we'll just go ahead and define that. So we'll define it as Axios. Now, of course, within this, the first thing that we'll define is .get. And of course, over here, we'll define our endpoint. So of course, it will be something like API, and simply we'll just define it like this. And then we can define as .then to see what is the response that we actually get. So over here, we'll define our response, and we'll define an arrow function. And of course, over here, we'll just define the value for the set nodes. So essentially we have defined over here, right, the use state. So we'll define or change the value for set nodes, and that will be set with the whatever response .data that we actually get, so that we can actually populate our use state for the function, the set node functions, to populate it with the response.data as well. And apart from this, of course, once we have defined this, we'll also define the .catch in case there is any error, if we come across any error. So the first thing that we have defined is the error, and then of course over here we'll define our arrow function, and we'll define our error as, in case like let's say we'll just go ahead and console log the error in case there is any error that actually comes from. All right. And we'll go ahead and close this, and this should actually be good enough to define our value. And now, of course, we'll also define our handle add function, where basically we'll be adding the idea about how, like, the post request is actually going to be used. So we'll define again an access request, and in this time what we'll be doing is that we'll have a post request. Again, we'll have the API, and over here we'll define, of course, alongside, since we require a new item, so we'll just go ahead and define a new item, since we have been basically the new item is what is going to be our value that will contain both the author and also the notes that we're actually going to be defining. So that's what is actually going to be there. And then we'll have the .then. Over here we'll be defining our response. So of course over here we'll define a function, and within this we'll have our response, and then of course within this we'll go ahead and do a console log for what exactly is the response. And of course this should be a post request, and this should be this. And then of course we'll also define a .catch to get if we have any error. So over here we'll again define a function, and over here we'll pass the error that passes through the function, and we'll just go ahead and define console.log and then the error. So we'll just define the error over here, and we can just simply close this. So this should be good enough to actually define our use effect, which basically is used to get get. And then of course we have the function handle add that will basically be used for the post. So we here, as you can see, that now if we take a look at our node input, we have basically an on click where we have a button, and then we basically call our handle add function, in which we pass this data as, and essentially this is the new add data. Over here you can define the new item. So essentially this new item will be consisting of the notes and the author. And of course, once we have clicked the button, we'll set the state for both our set notes and set author as initially, as we have defined it as empty. We'll just make it empty again, so that whenever we provide another input, we are able to send new values for whenever we actually do a button click. So that is what is going to be happening inside of the notes input. And of course, when it comes to the notes div, over here we are actually passing all of our notes. So this all notes is actually will be used to actually pass all the different nodes that are actually possibly there. And of course, this is utilizing this from the use effect, where we are defining all the nodes, and this is what we are actually utilizing over here. And we are basically utilizing the map function to pass on each and every possible node that is possibly there, and we are then displaying that over here with this node block, in which we are defining the author and the nodes. And how we are actually getting that is over here, as we have defined that within this we have defined the node block component, in which we have defined the values for the nodes and for the author. And of course, this will basically be an entire JSON object in which we are just fetching the nodes and the author value for that specific node, and we're displaying all of these nodes all together. So that's primarily the entire code. Of course, what next we can actually do is we'll go ahead and start by first creating our MongoDB instance. So for that, we'll go ahead and we'll go to MongoDB Atlas. So we'll just go to we'll go ahead and we'll go to mongodb.com, and we'll simply go ahead and sign in, and we will let's go ahead and sign in, and let's use our Google login, and we'll just wait for a second. And once it signs in, we'll just go ahead and actually create a new project, and of course a new collection inside of this. So let's go ahead, and we are basically creating an account for the first time. So it's just taking a couple of seconds to go ahead and start. Now, in case you're a student, basically you can also use MongoDB Atlas, because GitHub Education, with the help of the GitHub Student Pack, actually provides you with some credits. So you can actually use MongoDB Atlas to host your MERN stack applications. So we'll just go ahead and build a new application, and we'll just go ahead and finish. And preferred language is JavaScript. We'll just go ahead and finish this. And while we wait for this to finish, this should just get finished in some time. And of course, at the same time, we'll also be setting up a backend using Heroku. We'll also be setting up our front end on Vercel. So, and then of course, we'll be writing our entire GitHub action workflow that we'll be defining. So we'll be starting off with a free shared cluster, which is the free of cost one. And then of course, we can define our cloud provider, and then of course our location. For now, we'll just go ahead and define it as this. You can change the cluster name to, like, let's say MERN stack, and so MERN stack, let's say, and we'll go ahead and create this cluster. And so of course, when we do start by creating any kind of a project, we have to define basically the username and the password to actually be able to authenticate to our MongoDB instance that we are creating. For now, I'll just create it as scalar, let's say, and I'll define the password, and I'll create this user. We have defined our user, and now we can actually just define which particular environment we can connect from. So basically the IP address over here, we'll just define, like, let's say 0.0.0.0, which actually means that it is from anywhere. So we can just define this as our entry, and that should be good enough. So we'll just go ahead and finish and close this, and we'll go to our databases. So here you can see that we have created this new database, and it is just setting this up. And as you can see that we have set this up. Now, of course, if you look at the collections, right? So since it's a NoSQL database type, we have collections, and initially we don't have any collections, but we can actually go ahead and create a new collection. So over here we can add our own data. So let's say that we define our collection as, like, to include basically let's keep our collection name as let's say scalar, and then the collection name as, let's say, users. So the database name would be a scalar, and the collection name would be users. Let's create that for now. So as we create this over here, you can see that we have successfully been able to create the scalar.users. And right now, of course, there are no documents inside of our collection. But as we basically create and host our application, we'll be able to do that. Now, if we go to the overview, we can also basically fetch, and if we go specifically to our project 0, we can specifically utilize the connect button to get our Mongo URI. And for this, we'll actually utilize the connect with MongoDB Compass, which is a SaaS and like a GUI based tool to be able to actually look at our collections and look at our data. So for this, we can say that we already have a MongoDB Compass. In case you don't have, you can download that for your system. And we'll just copy this Mongo URI string. And what I'll do is I will go to my MongoDB Compass and I'll define the URL over here. So I'll just go ahead and edit this particular URI. And I will add the string that we have actually got to create a new connection. And over here, I'll just define the password that I have created for my user, and I should be able to actually connect to my MongoDB Compass and using the Mongo URI. And over here, you can see that I am able to actually successfully enter. And if you look over here within the scalar, I have my users collection that I have defined. So I've been successfully able to actually use the Mongo URI. So I can use the same Mongo URI that I've created in the .env folder. So over here, I'll just again change this to the actual value. So this should actually be able to run. So in case I were now to just go ahead and do something like npm install, so I should be able to actually run this successfully. So I'll just go ahead and run npm start. If I just run npm start, we should actually see it connected. So as you can see that the server has connected on port 4600 and we have successfully been able to actually connect to the database. So if you were to now, like, let's say, hit a post request, we'll be able to actually create the data and we'll be able to see how that data actually looks like. So basically this is from the backend. Now, of course, we have to also set up our application once we actually start defining our GitHub action workflow. We'll be utilizing that. But for now, we can actually go ahead and start with the creation of our GitHub action. So the first thing that we'll be actually doing is let's just quickly go ahead and add a .gitignore file. And we'll just define the node modules over here. So that should be good. And then we'll go ahead and define our GitHub first of all, to basically to create a new GitHub workflow. First thing that we have to do is we have to define a .github folder. Now within that, we have to define another folder that is workflows folder, and that's where basically we define our file. So like, let's say the file that we create is cicd.yaml file. So this will basically contain our entire action workflows that we'll be defining. So basically the first thing that of course we can define is the name for our workflow, and that's going to be a MERN stack application deploy workflow, let's say. So we'll be starting off with this. Then of course we have to define the push event. So of course the event on which our workflow will be triggered. So let's go ahead and define it as a push event, and we can specifically define it for which particular branches should this be triggered. For now, let's go ahead and just simply define it as for main. So whenever there will be a push taking place, whenever we'll be pushing any code, it will basically go ahead and trigger this workflow. And then of course we'll go ahead and define our jobs. So the first job, let's say, that we'll be defining is for our backend. So of course the first thing that we'll want to properly check is whether our backend is actually properly building or not. So let's define our first job as build. And of course, the first thing that we'll define it is on runs on. So basically we're defining where exactly it's going to be running. So the runner, so we'll define it as the one provided by default with GitHub, which is the Ubuntu latest.
And then of course, what we also want to ensure is that the steps that will be involved in this. So let's go ahead and define our steps. So the first one, of course, we want to do is the default one that we want to use is the uses. So the uses ones is essentially where we are defining which particular GitHub action we want to use. So the first one, of course, we'll be using is the actions and the checkout, and we'll just define the checkout v3. So essentially checkout enables your GitHub action and the workflow to be able to get access to your code base, and that's why it's really important to use that. Now, of course, last time when we had defined basically when we had also ran GitHub Actions for a node project, we have discussed about the setup node. So basically the setup node GitHub action is mainly utilized to be able to like, let's say, run tests, be able to install all the dependencies. That's where the setup node is actually utilized. So we'll be utilizing the same GitHub action, and we'll be utilizing the setup v2. So of course, the next one that we are going to be defining is the setup v2. In this case, since we are going to be using the setup node v3, so we can actually go ahead and define this over here. So basically, we are going to be utilizing the setup node at the rate v3, and over here we'll just define with this we'll just define that what should be the node version. So of course, in this case, we can simply just define the node version to be 16. So we can just define over here with node, and of course we'll just define our node version to be 16, so that whenever it uses it will be utilizing the node 16. Then of course the name, we'll just define it as, like, let's say npm install, to basically go ahead and install all the dependencies that we're going to be having. And for this, of course, we'll be running the command npm install. So we'll just go ahead and define that. Then of course this will be npm install, and we can define our environment to essentially suggest that the continuous integration is going to be true. So of course, this is just the first step, and that is the build step. And then of course the next, what we would also want to do is go ahead and also write our GitHub workflow for basically the job for deploying. So for that, basically what we're going to be doing is that we'll go ahead and again go to Heroku. So we'll just simply go to Heroku, and we'll create a new application. So we'll create a new app. So let's go and create a new app, and we'll define this app as MERN application CI/CD. And we can actually just call it CI/CD. So let's go ahead and create this new application. So once, of course, we have created this new application, whenever we define our code, we have to basically go ahead and set up our secrets. So in this case, we'll go ahead and define our secrets. So the first one that we'll actually define is basically our Heroku app name, and in this case, the app name that we have defined is basically the MERN application CI/CD. Then we can actually define our new secret, and we'll define it as Heroku app API key, which we can actually find by going to our account settings, and by going and basically copying our we'll just go ahead and copy our API key, and we'll define this. And then of course, finally, we can also define our Heroku app, basically our email. So we'll define our Heroku email, and should just be capital. So Heroku email, and we'll just define this as my actual email. So we'll just add these secrets. These secrets are important to be added, so that whenever, of course, when we'll go ahead and look at our deployment strategy, and we'll be writing the logic for our deployment for our GitHub action, we should be actually able to go ahead and successfully pass on the credentials, so that our GitHub action workflow can connect to our remote Heroku instance, and then actually push or deploy our backend application. So again, we'll just go ahead and define our our deploy. So like, let's say we can say that we'll define it as our deploy as the next job. So over here again, we can define runs on. Again, it's going to be Ubuntu latest. And then of course we can define steps. So again, in this case, the first one that we'll be using is again the checkout v3, so that our job is able to access our code. And then of course, the one that we are going to be using is the Heroku deploy by Akhilesh NS, which is our go-to. This is the one that we're actually going to be using. So we can see it on the marketplace over here, which is the deploy to Heroku, and you can see how it has been actually utilized. So over here, we can simply take this as a reference and define it after our uses. So we'll just take this a bit back, and then we'll just define with. So of course, the values that we have defined is the Heroku API key, and of course, this will actually be the app name. So in this case, this will be app name, and of course, the email would actually be the secrets, and we'll just define this as here. And of course, this would actually be the email, Heroku email. So the keys that we have actually defined, we are just utilizing them over here. So far what we have been able to do is we have basically gone ahead and within our GitHub action, we have defined the action for our backend, which consists of two different jobs. The first job is to actually build our backend project, and of course the next one is deploy. So we'll go ahead and actually push this code that we have written so far. So we'll just go ahead and do GitHub git add, and we'll simply just first go ahead and basically go ahead and push our code. So over here we can directly just go ahead and run this. So the message that we'll define is add GitHub action, then we'll sync the changes. All right, so let's go ahead and see how does this actually look. If we go to our MERN project over here, if we go to our actions, so it has failed for now. Let's see the reason for the failure. So it says that we have an error in the syntax. Let's quickly check which line. So it says line number 24. This is checkout v3. So we can quickly just go ahead and check what might be the reason for the error. So let's go ahead and push this, and we'll go ahead and push this as well. We'll sync the changes and we'll commit it. Let's see if this time it works. Alright, let's quickly check again. It says that there's an error in line 24. Let's just quickly take a look from our workflows that we have created over here. So here we should be able to see that there is an error using line 26, which is mainly due to the indentation. So of course we should probably put it over here. All right, yeah, this should actually work. So we'll just go ahead and commit this change. And now let's take a look quickly at our actions and see how is it actually performing. The first thing that it's doing is the build, and it has started to run the job. And of course, it's mainly just installing all the dependencies, and then we'll proceed towards the deployment. So it is able to run the installation correctly, and then of course now it's looking at the Heroku deploy. So it's connecting to our Heroku account by providing the details that we have actually provided to it, and we should successfully be able to run this in case everything goes on to be well. So in this case, our deployment does look to be good enough, and yes, it does actually run. So if we just go to our application over here, to our main CI/CD, and if we look at our overview, you can see that the deployment has actually successfully run. So now what we can actually do is we can go ahead
And inside of our for our front end, what we're going to be doing is that we are actually going to be creating a project on Vercel. So we'll go to vercel.com, and again you can utilize any other one as well. So you could potentially use even Netlify. You could utilize GitHub Pages, and of course any other tool, AWS Amplify. There are multiple ways you can use. For now, we'll just go ahead and create a new from our repository that we have created. So here, of course, we'll go ahead and utilize the GitHub Actions MERN project, and we'll import this. And for now, we'll just go ahead and simply we don't have to actually put anything else, because of course by default, since our project is a React project, so we can just go ahead and simply deploy this. Now, in order to actually utilize our GitHub action for the Vercel, the one that we're actually going to be using is the Vercel action. So basically the Vercel action, and it is basically a GitHub action that is provided by Zeit. So here you can see again the usage, what are the different things required. So we basically require the Vercel token, we require the org ID, and we also require the project ID. So basically to fetch all of this, basically the first thing that we can find is let's say the project ID. So project ID is pretty simple to find. Once we've actually gone ahead and we have deployed a project, we can simply go to our settings, and we can actually define we can see our project ID. So we'll go ahead and go to our secrets, and we'll define our project ID for our Vercel project. And again, if you're utilizing let's say AWS Amplify, or you're using Netlify, their secrets will be different. So in our case, we'll define this particular value as our project ID. So we'll go ahead and define our project ID over here, and then we'll create a new repository secret for our org ID. So basically the org ID is the same as your personal ID. So in case let's say if you are having a personal ID on Vercel, then of course it will be the org ID will be your personal ID. So you can fetch that by going to your settings and going to your user ID. So your user ID is the org ID, but in case you're part of an organization, then the org ID will be the organization ID. So we'll define our value as the org ID. So this is our org ID. So far we have defined these two, and then of course the final thing that we need is the Vercel token. So that you can actually generate by going to your dashboard, going to your settings, and within your personal account settings, going to tokens. And over here we'll create a new token. We'll call it the Vercel token, and we'll define the scope of full account and then no expiration date. We'll go ahead and create this account, and we'll generate this token, and we'll go ahead and define a new ID. So the Vercel token, and I'll define the value over here, and I'll add it, and this should be good enough. Now of course we can take a reference of this particular GitHub action. So what we'll do is of course in our case we just need this part, which is the deploy part, and we'll actually go ahead and define a new value. So first we'll just take a pull for our code, and actually go ahead and do it this directly in our code. Over here we'll go ahead and actually edit our skcd.yaml. We'll go ahead and define our value over here. Now we will actually define a new job, and we'll define it as let's say front end deploy, and we'll define this. So we'll just remove this, and we'll define this over here. So this should be checkout v3, and then over here we'll go ahead and define our Vercel token. So of course we already have that, and over here the subdirectory. So in our case the subdirectory that we have is basically the client, and what we'll go ahead and in the front end deploy, we'll go ahead and define this like this. So over here you can see that we have the Vercel token, we have the GitHub token, and then we have our org ID. So of course we have defined all of these different values, and then of course the working directory. In our case, the front end will actually be inside the client, because that's the front end folder, right? So we'll go ahead and just define over here inside the working directory as client, and this should actually be good enough. So this is where we have defined all of our values, and we'll go ahead and actually commit this and just add Vercel GitHub action, and we'll go ahead and commit these changes. Now, of course, just one thing that we'll have to change, of course, in our client side project over here, we'll define basically just a couple of things, a couple of changes that we can actually make to our app.js, and that's essentially the URL for our deployed backend. So we'll just simply go ahead and change that. So over here, I'll just go ahead and change the value over here. So I'll just go ahead and define this, and I'll just change the value for this as well. So this should be good enough. And I'll just go ahead and make these changes to the URL. And as we go to our actions, we should actually see now this, like, taking place in effect. So we have the front end deploy. So we should see how this actually gets deployed to our Vercel, and if it actually runs correctly or not. So let's see how this will actually perform. So we'll just wait for it to work, because it's currently queued. So of course, from backend side, it does get built, and we should very quickly also see our backend getting deployed on Heroku, while we wait for our front end to get deployed on Vercel. So currently it's running. So of course, as we have described that you can have any kind of a front end deployment that you can use. So it could be like, it could be Netlify, AWS Amplify, or even like, using something like DigitalOcean or any other cloud provider. And that's the benefit of actually GitHub Action, because it does support through its GitHub Actions marketplace. It does support all these different types of different ways to actually deploy and test your application. There are so many different tools that are out there, so you can utilize any one of them. So currently, as you can see, that it's currently building our application, and we'll just wait for it to build and see how our application actually performs. So just waiting for it to actually build. You can actually take a look at our previous deployment, where it was actually successfully able to deploy our application. As you can see that it ran the Vercel action successfully. So we'll just take a look at our existing one, and we'll go look at our front end deploy. So you can quickly see the live logs as it is actually completing it, and it has successfully been able to run that. As you can see that for the push event, so you can very clearly see that it basically ran specifically for the push event, because we have defined it that it will generate a unique URL whenever we basically have. So if I go to this GitHub Actions MERN project, we should be able to actually see over here. You can see that we have all of our different notes. So I can actually add a new note. So like, let's say the author is Shivai, and then we can say hello from CI/CD GitHub action. If I run this and if I add this note, we should actually see over here as you can see. So you can see that very easily we have been able to create this. And of course, what you'll also see is that with every commit that we make, we are actually also seeing a preview of the actual Vercel deployment that is taking place, because we are running that on every push. Now you could also technically run this for every pull request that we make. So for that, we can actually define the action. We could actually probably have even like a separate action. So instead of actually having all of our different jobs running inside of like one single action, one single workflow, we could actually have multiple workflows. One workflow could be dedicated just for your front end. The other workflow could be dedicated for your backend. Of course, in this case, what we have done is we have basically defined a single workflow file that has 3 different jobs. Two of them specifically to deploy our backend to Heroku, and you can see the logs. Of course, we saw that it is successfully working as well. And then, of course, the front end, we have deployed it on Netlify, on Vercel. So very similarly, you can actually also deploy your front end on GitHub Pages. If we go and take a quick look at the GitHub Pages, you can see that you can actually deploy and build from either a branch or even from GitHub Actions. So in case you have a simple HTML based project, you can actually utilize either being able to deploy from GitHub Pages from a branch or from even from Actions as well. And very similarly, you can go ahead and basically do your entire DevOps cycle, a CI/CD workflow from GitHub Actions for your full stack project, whether it's through Heroku or it's through AWS, GCP. All of them are actually readily supported with the help of GitHub Actions. So you'll find the specific workflows and the GitHub Actions that you can actually utilize inside of your workflows to be able to do the automated CI/CD for your full stack project, whether it's a MERN stack project or it could be any other tech stack as well. So I hope that does give you an understanding of how GitHub Actions actually works for a full stack project as well, like the one that we have just created. So in case again you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to us on the YouTube comments, and we'll be coming up with a lot more other DevOps related videos. So yes, stay tuned for those on the Scalar channel. Thank you so much for attending today's session.